content and community here at Brand Innovators. And we are so excited for our very first summit on the future of media, new and emerging media channels. Today, we're going to be joined by marketing leaders from Harman International, AT&T, Mars Wrigley, Dove, Unilever, Bose, Kellogg's, and many, many more. So please be sure to ask questions and use the chat function in Zoom to engage with both our speakers and our attendees. And before we kick off, I would love to share a quick recap of what Brand Innovators has been up to over the last year.
Welcome to the official 2021 kickoff Brand Innovators event. I'm sorry to negate all of that calming energy. We have an amazing program to kick off this year.
Alicia, it's so good to see you.
Meenakshi, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm really excited to chat with Julie.
It's my first event with Brand Innovators this year.
We have 3 days, over 30 main stage speakers, 13 different private roundtable discussions, everything from data-driven advertising to purpose-driven marketing, future of retail, entertainment and streaming, everything that you, the marketer, needs to know to have a successful 2021.
The brand purpose obviously is critical as brand stewards, as communicators, as strategic marketers. We need to understand what brand we're trying to build. As we entered COVID, we knew like this has the potential to be a catalyst and a galvanizing force for our entire operation.
People's psychology about the pandemic obviously changed week by week and month by month, where we had to really focus on safety and sanitation, contactless delivery, contactless carryout early on.
The entire pandemic, we've been working on just making sure that our content is speaking to the times, is sensitive to what people is going through, but is also continuing to evolve.
I'm sure that everyone here has seen babies and families and partners passing behind the Zoom or the Teams calls. And I think the ability to want to keep human and to allow for the integration of personal and professional lives is something that helps a lot and put people at ease.
We are shopping brands that are consistent with our values. We are looking for brands that have a point of view in terms of society and what is happening currently and current events, that are also close and working with our communities, and importantly, of course, that they are sustainable.
I think that's so important for brands right now to really make sure that they're not just sticking to whatever media plan or social plan they might have had before, they think they're supposed to do, or waiting for things to get back to normal. There's not a normal, there's not a thing to get back to. We're really in a place where we can only go forward and really progress.
Every single touch that we have with a consumer is an experience and is a representation of the core of who we are as a brand. And so all of those need to weave together. It's not a new concept. It has been around for years, but now consumers have raised the bar of the expectation of every single experience. The number of experiences in our brand ecosystem has exploded astronomically.
Think about your customers and try to see if you can map their unmet needs that kind of point you in the right direction for the kinds of things that you should be experimenting with. Obviously, testing and iterating kind of new things in a way that makes sense and that give you the confidence to really launch new things at scale.
On my mind, it's just B2C. Like we're on the same side, like their B is my B. What is more important, the structure, the processes, or the culture? I've seen places that have no structure, no process, but it works because the people are a certain type of people and it fits well with what they're trying to accomplish.
What is that story that any of us are telling, and how do we make sure that it's actually satisfying and neat? Think about search, think about social advocacy, think about all of these other channels. Like, you need to be relevant and you need to be needed.
Well, the worst thing you can be in our business, as you know better than I, is irrelevant. We certainly are out of that, and now we're starting to see embracement. People have a feeling towards Gillette that's positive. And when you are able to combine love and respect, I think you're able to secure business for a long time.
We focus our PR only around March for Women's History Month and November for Women's Entrepreneurship Month. The closer you keep whatever area of purpose you explore and you dedicate yourself to what your brand stands for, the easier it is.
All right. Well, without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome our host for today. Here is Marty Berman, the Director of Sales for Quantcast. Welcome to the stage, Marty.
Thanks so much, Annie. I appreciate it.
Good
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the intro. Very excited to be here. And welcome to everybody. Just real quick before we kick off, a real quick overview on Quantcast. Quantcast runs the largest AI-driven audience behavior platform on the open internet, which directly quantifies over 100 million mobile and web destinations. And our platform is comprised of internet scale first-party data and self-adapting predictive models using integrated IA optimization, and really allows our machine learning technologies to continually map the consumer behavior graph and sees the average internet user's activity over 100 times a month, and it really gives us a real-time pulse of the internet. And at this time, I want to, I'm thrilled to welcome our first speaker of the day. We're joined by Katie Raymond, who's the head of digital marketing and social media for Americas at Harman International. And today's session is going to be moderated by Timur Yarno, who's the CEO and co-founder of Neutronian. So welcome to the stage, Katie and Timur.
Thank you. Good. Thanks for the introduction. Let me see if I can. There we go. Let's start my video.
There we go.
Okay.
Hey, there you are.
Thank you, Katie. Yeah.
Hey.
Surprise. So we go through. So good to connect. Thanks for that intro, Marty, and great to see you, Katie. Katie, why don't we have you kick off and go first? We can both kind of talk about our roles in our companies, but can you just give everyone a little bit of background on your role as head of digital marketing and on Harman as well?
Yeah, so Harman is a connected technologies company. So most consumers may recognize brands like GBL and Harman Kardon from an audio standpoint, but a big crux of the business is also around automotive and connected technologies there. So thinking about, what the future of driving is, but also what, the future of cities could be and things like that. So Harman has been around, for GBL, it's been around for 75 years. And my role really is leading digital, social, and then also paid media. So from strategy to execution around brands that you see in stores like a Best Buy or a Target. So think portable speakers, think headphones, think home audio, connected sound bars, things like that. And my role is really helping bridge that gap for the brand and also in culture, and do some really innovative and different thinking type campaigns around our products, but also just around our brand. As we know, the world is constantly changing. The country is constantly changing. There's a lot of different conversations going on, and how GBL can play a really active role in that, and how we can elevate experiences for consumers really around audio and music.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for that intro. And it's interesting. I haven't, but I have memories of Harman as a brand from my earliest days as being a car owner when I, late teenager. And I think some of the original faceplate technology that came out so that's great. And I've been eager to chat with you. So just for everyone in the audience, so Neutronian is be an interesting dialogue because Neutronian, Katie, with your perspective on social and digital channels, Neutronian is a platform company that creates a quality score or almost like a bond rating for audience data. So our goal is to be kind of like the Moody's of marketing tech, audience information. And as I think many of us in the audience have started to think about different data marketplaces, and I'm sure Katie, as you think about how you look at your customer base, and there's obviously by generational mix, but all the different attributes that go into that. We've wanted to bring a quality rating to not only is this your typical age, gender, household income breakdown, but by generation, millennial, Gen Z, but then getting into things like, are these IDs that we're looking at really, Midwest-based sports enthusiasts, auto intenders, for example. So that's been our focus, and we've grown a ton. We work with platforms like Omnicom and great agency brands like Goodway Group, et cetera, and with top data providers like Bombora on the B2B side, and Share This, which does some social analytics, and Affinity that does that. So that's our overview on Neutronian. And my background is in audience verification and in the activation space. So this would be a great conference. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you. But can you talk a little bit about that? How are you looking at your outreach? And I think maybe just how are things shifting between, I don't know, that I'm Gen X, you've got millennials, and then I think Gen Z is a real focus point now. So how have you seen that evolve, and what's your you and Harmon's perspective on that?
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing with Gen Z is, compared to millennials, is Gen Z really wants to be part of the conversation. They want to create the conversation. They also want to create content, right? And from a millennial perspective, and I'm kind of on that tail end of the millennial group here, but you kind of get ads and you get them served up to you, or you get content and they get served up to you in your feed, and that's really kind of it, and that's how you consume. I think what Gen Z has been doing, not only just thinking through things like societal changes and making sure that brands are taking stances that align with their values, but they also want to create the content for the brands as well. So it's not just always a matter of right place, right time, right target. It has to really feel much more meaningful and much more one-to-one to them. And what we've really taken a look at, especially on the GBL side, is how can we look at Gen Z, which is really what a lot of brands are looking at just from a generational standpoint as this new kind of gold mine, but also a very different way of thinking. How can we reach that audience much more authentically as a brand versus just advertising? What can we do that goes much more deeper than just surface level?
I think that's very interesting. And as we talked, and we prepped a little bit for this, as we were talking about the way that Gen Z wants to be involved, very, because it actually correlates to some research that we've done on our side as we broke it down, and particularly with a few of our advisors that do engagement research and do it at places like Stanford. It does feel like, as a generalization, millennials are not as strong in some of those characteristics. So for example, maybe there aren't some of the privacy and millennials kind of being open with privacy, maybe like the Facebook generation, but Gen Z wants to be engaged, just as you talked about. And for example, when it comes to data, and I think being marketed too, there's a willingness to share, but it's got to be done for the right reason. There's got to be the right value exchange. And I think the word that we saw in the research was that Gen Z actually wants to be entrepreneurial with their data and with their engagement. So does that correlate to what you say? And in terms of, I guess, does this necessarily entail reaching out to the campuses in particular? Is that like a real focus when you talk about Gen Z, or how?
It's twofold for us, right? So we have two things that we do that really work for us. Is almost like beta tests on what we think can work, what might not work, So I think, you have to fail a little bit in this space, but you really have to do it quickly and just move on, right? And you take those learnings and you take them for whatever that next step might be. So for us, we do a content creator network, and what that is it's a group of creators that have either interacted with GBL, or they are people who just kind of fit the brand, and we use them to really help us develop content, right? So we think as marketers sometimes can be stuck in marketing mode, very much so, but sometimes it gets very difficult to turn into, well, if I'm not over strategizing it from a marketing perspective, what does the consumer really want? And the best place to go is to the consumer. So we've been really a proponent of that content creators network, where we really value both diversity with who is on camera and showing up on our feeds, but also who's behind the camera as well, because that is something that's inherently important to the brand. But also, going back to what you mentioned about campuses, we are working on campus ambassador programs, because I think that is a really interesting way to get the brand in front of that audience, but we're doing it a little bit differently. We're utilizing these great ambassadors that we have, these campus ambassadors, to help us navigate the world of TikTok, right? So we're talking a little bit about emerging channels. I don't necessarily think TikTok is so emerging now. Maybe at the consumer level, I think from the brand level, it's still emerging, and how brands can get it right. But we're really interacting with the students and these campus ambassadors, and they're helping us, hey, how can we talk about headphones in a more authentic way in this platform? How can we create content that feels relevant to you and your audience? So they help us, by creating the content itself, but also talking strategy with us. And there's no better way to help figure out what that next step should be for you as a brand than really going to that consumer and taking those insights and taking it and figuring out what that next step is. So that's one way, we're using this kind of a emerging platform, at least for brands, and using Gen Z to really help guide us and learn more about them. But in the process, they're also learning about marketing, they're learning about business. So it becomes like a really, almost like a reverse mentorship to a degree, where they're helping us, navigate what some of these newer waters are.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think it sounds like it's a win-win from the from your perspective, the brand, but also the experience that the campus ambassadors get as a intern or something like that. Now, I guess a huge question that will come up, I'm sure, is so how did the strategy for campus ambassador recruitment change with the pandemic and the whole mix of school reopening, which we won't, I have kids in school, so I've got perspective on school shutdowns that I think many working parents share. But how did that change for you?
Yeah, I think for us, right, so initially this campus program, we've done it before, and it's been more of, hey, you can do different events on campus, right, different things with your friends, and they're going through something as well, right? And what we decided to do for this one is exactly, what I spoke about, is just really using them to help develop that content, get that strategy side thinking, and really look at it more of like a mentorship type thing before, instead of something, more along the lines of helping us sell the product in that piece. So it's really more of a beta test for us. And the way that we found these ambassadors was really from looking at their social followings, looking at what kind of content that they created, looking at, who they are as individuals, right, and their interests and their passion points. And that's how we would choose them and bring them into the fold. They would go through a brand training, we'd go through, they'd have access to us, and each week they're doing these kinds of challenges and really helping us navigate some of these waters.
Wow, that's so. Was it literally kind of a one-to-one outreach of that point? And was there did you develop a entire kind of training and onboarding? I would call it. Is that?
Yeah,
part marketing and part HR campaign. It sounds like.
Yeah, right. Because, you really need to train them so that they know about the brand, what the brand stands for. One, because it helps them, learn about us, but it also helps them just from the standpoint of talking about, product or different features, those kinds of things, which it helps with, but also, just expectations, right? When you're representing on behalf of a brand, there's certain expectations that come into play and how you represent yourself, right? And then also, some of the nitty gritty about disclosures and things like that on the legal side, which are great things for them to learn, right? As they move through, what may be marketing, what might be something else that they choose to go into. These are all things that are really helpful. But yes, we create a whole brand training for them, and they have some great questions associated with that, and it's a great learning experience for all of us.
I'm chuckling because you may hear some kids noise in the background here. I think that's a common theme for many.
I know that well.
Yeah, exactly. And if I'm lucky, you won't hear about a dog too much. But what about just so high level as you saw that roll out, and how long has that program been going on?
This has been kind of, I would say it's like 2.5, right? So still a little bit newer. And the adaptation, of course, with everything that happened last year. But, it's one of those things that you constantly evolve and you change with what's happening in the world, right? So, we're hoping it's something that can go for a long time and, be successful and that we can measure that success, whether it's how we formulate content for Gen Z to, whatever the pieces might be, post pandemic world and what this program looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with 2.5 years, you kind of almost half and half of pre-pandemic world, and then in pandemic world. Any like just really high level trends you'd share in terms of how you saw the campus ambassadors change in their engagement once COVID rolled out versus pre and post, and what I mean, like in terms of types of content or just even amount and the support. I mean, there must have been there must have been some interesting trends. I mean, I'll hold off on guessing what it was, but anything just very, very high level.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're trends, right? Because it's each ambassador is an individual, right? And what their comfort level is going to be different, and how they express themselves on this. I think what I saw as a really great trend is how much the ambassadors wanted to connect with each other across schools, right? And learn more about who their partner ambassadors would be, whether it's, at Arizona State or, at University of Florida. Like, they all just want to connect, they're like, how can we start, a WeChat group? Like, what else can we do here to gain that connection and gain more people really into their network that they can learn from? So I found that, really interesting in wanting to make sure that they stayed connected outside of just what, we were giving them as challenges, but more so of, how they can stay connected post this and during this, to really help bring the program to life.
Mm-hmm. Great. So thinking a little bit differently here, we were talking about the kind of the campus ambassadors and really the outreach from your view, changing perspective a little bit, especially with so many marketers on this call. Can you talk a little bit about your own kind of internal, maybe education to, or how your digital marketing, and you've got a, long time brand that has more traditional channels, I'm sure as well what that mix is, but maybe anything kind of high level in terms of how you kind of educate around you in terms of these emerging channels and what you, how you asked to be factored into those overall plans and how you kind of educate on what results are being delivered. I mean, I'm sure that's a constant, probably a huge part of your work.
Yeah. I think what's great is we have a fantastic insights team at Harman that, has really helped push us, in measurement and figuring out the different insights. They do a fantastic job. And I think, for us, Harman is really a digital first company. And, sometimes, when you think of companies that have been around for a long time, that's not always the first thing that comes to mind. But if you think of the connected experience that Harman drives, that things like emerging channels, these emerging types of platforms, even just thinking specifically about the consumer, it's not necessarily a challenge to be able to talk about these emerging pieces, where we think we might go, to be able to test these kinds of things. So I think we're really fortunate, in that regard is, we're all really open and we want to do what's best for the brand, but also what's best for the consumer as well, and how we can tell those stories and really truly connect with them. So I think from that regard, it's always an open conversation, which I know isn't always the case in other places. So we know that we're really fortunate there and being able to really move the needle and bridge that gap, with culture for JBL.
Great. And you and I have a couple more minutes, I think, of just us chatting. And then there's like 6 or 8 questions already in the Q&A. So we'll have a good chance for Q&A. And just to remind folks in the audience, if you have a question for Katie, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and I'm looking for it. So that's wonderful. I think one good question that came in that I would be fascinated is, we talk about, I agree, TikTok, I think, has broad awareness, and there is probably other platforms that you may already be de-emphasizing, or you're not, depending on it, but maybe just a little bit on how you monitor for the emerging trends that your customers may want to engage with, and kind of at what point do you decide to engage? Like how do you keep your radar out, and what are some of the metrics or the qualities that you look for in terms of, at what point did TikTok get your attention that way, and how are you tracking that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Because it's kind of how some consumers really just learn about different products and things. It's really monitoring influencers and what they're doing and where they're going. It's monitoring thought leaders, in the space as well, and seeing what's being talked about, right? Like Clubhouse, right? Like Clubhouse, in Gen Z, it's still out whether Gen Z is something that they're going to really lean into Clubhouse. They may, from a career standpoint, and say, hey, I can talk to, these different, marketing leaders or finance leaders, or there's a Gen Z, room that I want to join and that I speak to, right? So, maybe, they're looking at things like that, but we're really looking at, influencers, what they're consuming and where they're headed. And then we're also just looking at just the world, right, itself. I know I go to Reddit sometimes and I look at Reddit and I can see some of the things that are happening as well, right, is from a trending perspective, and, some of the conversations that begin there around certain technologies and things. So there's some interesting pieces there, but I'm of the mindset that you always need to have a learning mindset and you always need to be curious. So for me, it's going to these different places and learning about them, but also looking at, the influential people and what they're talking about, how they're talking about it, and then how they're also using the platforms. And then from there, we as a brand kind of need to take a look and say, do you need to be everything to everyone and need to be everywhere? Or do you need to be really smart and really surgical about where you show up as a brand to make more of an impact? So we have to weigh those things.
Mm-hmm. And how many, by the way, how many countries is Harman selling into? I mean, I actually don't know the distribution globally.
It's a global company. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I imagine, any from retailers like we talked about, like the Best Buy and Targets, right? Some of those have a global presence to, distributors as well. I mean, we're available globally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about in terms of your team? I'd say like your direct team and then your parallel, kind of parallel internally, but how do you, I say, how do you structure internally? And I guess keeping yourself educated and looking at influencers, but are there other, particular types of skills or things that you're asking your folks to develop or, particularly track now? What are the things you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when you first start off in the business, I was at WWE before I came to Harman. And, one of the things is like, very quick thinking, right? If you're living in the social digital world, it's very fast paced. Things are constantly changing. The message, that you send from a brand may stay consistent, but the world around it is constantly changing. So I think it's being prepared for that, making strategic but quick decisions. I also think another piece, which is a little bit more tactical, is being able to edit video and being able to do the small things like Photoshop work, which may seem small, but in the end, it ends up being very, very valuable, in such a quick turn world, right, that we live in, and as far as some of the content that gets put out. So I think just speaking more tactically, I think those things, are super important to have on a team, to make sure that, the vision that you have can come to life. And it's not just, it's Harmon's vision, right? And we're all one team, whether we work on sports or digital or, PR, whatever it might be. It's all really one team that we work under for really just, pushing that vision. And again, like striving to have GBL really be at the intersection of culture.
Yeah, that's a great point. Like those little tactical things that can make a huge difference when you just need to get something done and not have to wait for an outside party or something. That's a really interesting comment.
Yeah, even photography, right? Like things like that, right? If you're thinking, going into the pandemic, right? And sometimes you have agencies, sometimes it is a one person, show where you are taking the photos, you are editing the videos. Well, all of those things, going into a world where you couldn't have, any of those kinds of commercial shoots or things like that, those things become increasingly more important, so not just, define what your leadership skills are, but also those smaller skills can come into play big time, as you move throughout, your career. Some may say it's like maybe in the weeds, but I think, you have to be able to do those things and keep those skills fresh, to really keep moving along.
Yep. I think there was I was on a very interesting session, must have been October, November, but there was a marketer who, like many in the consumer space, I think they saw, a huge shutdown and a huge slowdown. There's my kids in the background. They get very excited. So in this case, this one particular marketer had seen I think they said literally in April and May of last year, it was a consumer product. Their revenue had gone to zero, and then they were in the home improvement space, and they had kept on marketing. But then as people focused on home improvement projects, all of a sudden the spigot got turned on. They actually had way more business than they could handle. And in that situation, they actually shut off all of their marketing spend because they just had so much organic demand. That was a fascinating discussion. Have you changed or, like reallocated marketing spend dollars significantly, or just any big change in just actual spend over the last 12 months because of pandemic or just trends? I mean, is it?
I think any brand, is constantly evaluating what they do in the space, whether, what they spend on, in those pieces. So I think, in that regard, we're like, the majority of brands, when the pandemic hit is you reevaluate and figure out what you need to do and what the next steps are.
Are you as you're looking at social, I mean, are you looking at and tracking the actual like e-commerce path to purchase points as well? Are you getting like yourself specifically like getting into the funnel? Or are you generally more focused on the awareness and the upper funnel?
I think it's both, right? I think social commerce is growing so much that you have to be able to not just meet the demands from an awareness perspective, but you also have to meet the demands that, fall into more of the lower funnel as well. So, as a brand, you track those things and you want to see, what's where you might need to reevaluate. But I think, as social commerce grows, it's increasingly important to be able to measure those pieces and how those things can track, to the greater goal.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think I think anything from your, I don't know if it's like from your distributor retailers, like, are you getting that data from the Best Buy pages to the social commerce? I mean, I think all of that together is probably, fascinating data to track and be aware of. So let me see, a few other questions have come in just on the Q&A. So you're getting lots of interested folks wanting to hear on that. Yeah, I think here's an interesting one just in terms of if you think about Harman as a digital first brand. I wonder, who we could define as a more legacy or true, like a heritage brand, I guess. And I don't, looking at your background, I mean, is there a few things you could say as to what a digital first, already marketing Gen Z brand, what advice would you give if there was someone who's coming from much more of a traditional, I guess, staid brand? I don't know that I don't know how, kind of hard time thinking about who wouldn't be digital first today in terms of the necessity of it, but any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, you have to know what your brand stands for, right? And what it stands for Gen Z. What is that value set that you have? I think that is super important, and it is becoming increasingly, it is already increasingly important to Gen Z to have brands that not only, say something, but then stand behind it, right? So it's really important for brands to make sure that they know what their values are, they know what they stand for and what their purpose is. And I think that is a really good way to help you figure out how you can unlock what that next step is. Maybe it's influencers and how you use influencers, right? So making sure that the influencers that you work with align with that as well, and those types of pieces. So I think, really making sure that you have that bigger picture of who you are as a brand is going to help you market even better to Gen Z, because, are you being realistic here, or are you just kind of like showboating and saying you're doing something, or are you really doing something? That bar there, like Gen Z is going to find that and they're going to call you out on it. So you want to make sure that you have, all of those pieces in a really good spot. And I think that'll unlock so much more for you to market to. It's just as a brand.
Mm-hmm. And then perhaps without letting out any secret sauce, but I'd be curious as to, I'm sure you're getting data on Gen Z or just influencers and a whole variety, from the platforms themselves. I'm sure that's part of the value prop. Can you talk a little bit about what alternative sources of data you're using to kind of fact check what the platforms themselves are telling you about these influencers or categories? Is it anything from opinion polling or survey polling to other tracking, tracking platforms? And again, you don't have to name any specific tech that you're using or form, but I don't give that away, but just.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say this is that we have a really holistic approach to insights that, measure things, short and long term and what the impacts are. So, from that standpoint, we're really able to glean insights that can help us in the interim, but then also help us in the long term to really help inform that strategy.
Okay, great. I'm sure that is long developed and is quite a bit invested in that. So, well, great, Katie. Thank you. I really enjoyed that, and I'm actually eager to check out some of the videos. I'm going to go out and find them on TikTok, and
great.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Cool.
By the way, I do not have my own TikTok channel. I'm not, I'm more of an observer through my children.
Yeah.
Love TikTok. Well, thanks so much, Katie and Timur, for kicking us off today. Really interesting session. Katie, I loved how you talked about your ambassador program, and I think Timur, you pointed out just probably a really challenging time right now. But what an interesting space and a great way you guys have approached it. right? From really taking a deeper dive into the individuals who you've brought in to make sure that they're relevant to your brand, which I'm sure has really paid off in dividends to make sure that they're, vested in what it is that you're doing. So kudos to you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, again, thanks so much. We're going to head to our next fireside chat of the day. We're going to be joined by John Starkweather, who is the AVP, the Associate Vice President of Marketing for AT&T. Welcome, John. And session's going to be moderated today by Ted Smith. Ted is the Head of Enterprise Sales at Audigent. So I want to take this moment to welcome you both to the stage. So welcome, Chris and Ted.
Thank you very much, Marty. Great to be here and really excited to be talking with John. I'll also note that really great fireside chat in the last session with Timur and Katie. Somewhat coincidentally, I've known Timur for about 20-ish years here in the industry, and I think that they're doing interesting stuff within the data quality space. So a nice segue to our conversation. But John, great to see you. How are things with you?
Doing well, actually. I'm trying to get adjusted here. Can you see me all right?
Loud and clear. Coming in great.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to this. It was good to connect with you, and I've been a long time member of this community, and it's always fun to chat.
Yeah, I was participating in some of the South by Southwest activities last week, and I think that we were all remiss in not being able to be down there in Austin, of course, but excited to be able to do these opportunities virtually and great to connect. I want to go do a bit of an introduction on both sides, but I had a quick piece of trivia I wanted to get your thoughts on, rather impromptu. So famously, the first advertisement that went up on the web was in October 17th in 1994. Do you happen to know who the advertiser was and where that ad was placed?
So it actually, I need to know this because I've heard this trivia point recently, but it was actually AT&T. And the woman who actually worked on it, I'm completely spacing. She was talking about it because she recently retired. And I know that she rides a lot of bikes, and she's a friend of mine on Facebook, and I'm completely spacing. If she's listening, she's going to slap me that I don't know the answer to this question. So please save me here.
No, I don't mean to put you on the spot in that regard. I mean, yeah, you're exactly right. It of course, was AT&T. And I think that she also worked with Jim Spiros at the time, who was on it. And it was on hotwired.com back in 1994. And it famously, depending on who you ask, it got somewhere between a 44% and 85% click-through rate on that ad, which of course is not what anyone sees these days. But
I'm glad we're not still working against that benchmark.
Yep, exactly. Well, great. Yeah, let me, as a matter of introduction, let me, if I can, I'd love to introduce myself. So I'm Ted Smith. I'm the head of enterprise sales for Audigent. Audigent is a first-party data platform and a next-gen DMP. We work very closely with leading publishers in the world, including Newly, Food 52, but you also look at Condé Nast, you look at Universal Music Group, Warner Music Group, a whole slate of premium publishers, and we basically originate data from them in a fully compliant way and make those audience data sets actionable for marketers such as yourself in new ways. Mm-hmm. So excited to have this conversation kind of about some of the creative applications of that and your use of technology around that.
Yeah,
so,
you guys are certainly right in the thick of all the fun change that's going on in the industry. Just a little bit about myself, maybe in between the lines of a bio. I'm a dad. I've got 3 kids and spent a lot of time with them. My oldest, unfortunately, is going into advertising. As much as I wanted him to be go be a doctor, go do something where you're not up late and weekends out on shoots and doing things. And I unfortunately or fortunately took him on a short TV shoot years ago, and that was my mistake. I'm not going to have a doctor in the family.
Yep.
But a little more about me. I've been at AT&T now for longer maybe than I expected, because I've moved from a lot of different companies in technology over the course of my career, both in the US, spent a lot of time in Asia and in Europe. But my roots are really kind of summarize my roots is in community engagement. working with people that today you would say, oh, that was an influencer program. Certainly nobody was using those terms back then, but that's kind of my bit, like really spend a lot of time with people who are using, developing, influencing others, and now an advertiser of some sort.
Yeah, that's interesting. We didn't talk about this before. Your longevity at AT&T, what is it, do you think, specifically about that role that has, afforded you the opportunity to stay there and maybe try new things and flex a lot of the muscles that you've had?
It's a really interesting company. The thing that attracted me back when I joined in 2013 was just a big mix of kind of gnarly problems that leadership was very open about and wanting to fix. And that's always attracted me. I'm less about, and this is probably good and bad, but less about the ones where it's, everything's on an easier path or on just a clear uphill path. I like kind of tearing things up and being able to figure things out. And as a company, it's been a lot of transformation. They've acquired quite a few companies. I know we'll talk a little bit about Xandr here today.
Yep.
Certainly on the entertainment side, done a lot of things, but they've also sold a lot of things and really rethought approaches. And so a lot of good people. Big company has all of its goods and bads, and it's been fun. And I very happy with what I'm doing.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine you find yourself at the center point of a lot of different types of businesses, which always keeps it quite interesting, right?
Yeah. Center point, center of the target, depending on the day, who's coming after you. But it makes life interesting. I think that's why a lot of us are in this industry, is it's constantly evolving.
That's right. So one of the things you and I talked about was, your creative background and the idea that around creativity in general in advertising and in marketing, but the idea around personalization and the ways in which, technology is definitely advancing a lot of the opportunities around personalization. When you think about that from a creative standpoint, like what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I really, and this is going to sound generic, and then I'll try and be really specific, but it's always about the people that you're communicating with. And I say that even though that sounds generic, because it gets lost really fast. All of us would say, yeah, well, of course, but it gets lost really fast when in the heat of the moment, there's a financial target to hit, there's a new product or service or something that's being launched, and your management change is like, we need to go, here's what's important about it. I want to see, bright, shiny, marketing and all the right targeting in place really quickly. And that is all very important, right? But it can really lose the real need by the person that you're trying to influence. And so the best marketing, the best public facing marketing in my career has started years prior to ever going to market with something on a website, a brochure, a video, whatever. And again, that might seem obvious, but it's really about understanding what the needs are of the audience, and not just from the perspective, I want to sell them this thing, therefore I'm going to find a way that, make my widget really, really fit for them, but being honest about how what you're creating needs to adapt in order to meet their need. I mean, I think the kind of work that you guys are doing is really interesting because you have broad capabilities, but ultimately it's about crafting a solution for a partner. And so you're kind of inherently in that way. And then certainly you can provide scale right for all, but if you don't get it right for that partner that's there. And so in my career, being a lot in technology and products, so you get really excited about the functionality and miss the individual. And you have the luxury when I talk about doing those things years in advance, but that can happen in a very accelerated fashion. And I think a lot that's about to change for us in this world where, cookies are going to go away and we're going to lose our ability to be hyper personalized is going to put even more pressure on us to understand the audience. We will no longer have what I kindly and rudely refer to as the crutch of marketing, and that can be, well, hey, I can manage my advertising or my marketing on a spreadsheet if I wanted to, and allow some technology, certainly cookies, to follow people around. And yes, you didn't buy those shoes on our website, but I'm certainly going to chase you all over the place. And we look at the numbers and you go, hey, well, that actually kind of works. But as individuals, we hate it. So as that goes away, right, that crutch goes away. We're going to need to be, great marketing will be hyper personalized from a contextual standpoint. We won't have as much, certainly will be some, as much to be able to do that in tracking your very specific action. But I think as a human, I'm excited about that. As an advertiser, I'm excited about the challenge, but also the opportunity to be more human and respectful. Right place, right message at the right place at the right time. It will force that back on us.
Yeah, I agree. I think that when you consider the best advertising, the best communication that you've seen as a consumer, a lot of the times it feels personal, it feels personalized, but it's really just compelling, great creative work in a lot of ways. And we sort of, it resonates with all of us. And so it feels personal. And to be able to contextualize that more, and to be able to think of audiences in cohorts or in groups of people, is much more compelling and much more interesting than some sort of like tricky dynamic creative optimization type stuff that, is further down the spectrum of being perhaps too personalized in most instances. Right. So, we actually just hired a chief creative officer at Autogen for that very same idea, that balance of being data driven, where at the same time, ideas come at a creative level is really critical to the way that we think about, working with our clients.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. And I think, a few years ago, people may have really scratched their head at, you guys making a decision like that. And I've seen other companies that are predominantly data led, or you would believe, your IP is this amazing algorithm or bots or way that you're compiling data sets. And that's what you're all about. But we've lost the humanity in all of that. And I think we all are tiring of it. Even though it's subconscious, we're tiring of it. And fortunately or unfortunately, from a privacy standpoint, and the changes, what Apple's about to do any day now, what Google we know is going to do in early 2022, the crutch is gone. So can we go back and be more human? Be more human in our approach. Like, there's going to be no other choice that we'll have.
Yeah, and I think you being a marketer, but thinking yourself from the consumer standpoint, how do you receive messages? Is critical to that human element of how you work as a marketer as well.
Yeah, that's right. I oftentimes will go back to an example. I've seen this repeated many times by one of my favorite brands, which is REI. Does outdoor gear. And years ago, when I had moved to Seattle, I bought a tent from them, and I bought lots of things from them, but I bought a tent from them, and based upon the size of the tent and maybe my age or something else, but basically just by the size of the tent, it was clear it was like a family purchase, maybe had small children. Anyway, they sent me an email, thanking me for it, and a couple of tips of how I could get more life out of it, which were super useful. And then it included a book, and it was best hikes for children in my area. I think there was a second book that was there as well that they didn't sell. That was a link over to Amazon that I bought. And that book I took everywhere, and it was super helpful for me. And it was the first purchase I made with them.
Yep.
And from that point, I was like, wow, like that helpful. They didn't need to come back to me and say, well, now you can buy all these Gore-Tex things and et cetera. Like, they were really relevant. And that's a really old example, but I know the way that not just email is done today, but you talk about DCO, and I'm just different parameters. I'm just, it's all based on other assumptions and data sets, and getting back to just you're going to, like, your first party data, like, I have this relationship, I'm going to respect that relationship. And that's going to be a big part of what I do is going to be, is always been important, but it'll be more so in the coming year.
Yeah, thinking of marketing as providing a service to existing customers, new customers, or prospective customers. Thinking of that very service-oriented idea, like that RAI example is a great one. Kind of really heartwarming. You think of a brand that you're going to have an affinity to for life. It's because they treated you as if they were a concierge at a nice hotel or something like that. They
absolutely
relationship, and it wasn't marketing necessarily. It was service through something like an email, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? Are there examples of that with AT&T? How you guys are considering communication in that same path with customers?
We are. So you're a big company and been around for a long time, and every piece of communication has been, and particularly in the fields that I'm working in, we are going in and looking at whether it's a form on an old procurement site, or whether it's a contract notification for some older service, to everything that's new, but really looking at every touch point and trying to make improvements. And I'm sure many of the people, maybe yourself, have had experiences with us, and over the years, I'm sure they've been varied, but it's absolutely at the center of everything that we're doing right now. Over the last several years, I've been part, with my team and a few others, been part of really building out I talk about assessing everything, about building both the tools, combining, connecting data sets, so that can be done at scale. And you can imagine a company that's been around for 100.5 years and a long time, that you've got different systems and from different places. And so it's a really important investment, because again, it's about that individual relationship. Every single one individually has to be just as important as the millions of others, and doing that at scale. You can scale it, but in some ways you can't. It's got to be perfect for each person.
Yeah, and everybody has their own relationship with AT&T, coming at it from different angles. They might be business customers. They might be coming in from the legacy DirecTV business.
That's right.
So different angles. Bit of a pivot here, but you guys, one of the tools that you guys have in your tool belt when you think about centralizing some of this is Xandr, which you spoke of. So with the acquisition of Xandr, you guys have a partnership there, that's interesting to understand how you use that. Any interesting use cases of how you work with them?
Yeah, a couple of things. So first off, it's been fun as a marketing geek to be close to the kind of reinventing the innovation that's going on, and having a sister company that close. And we're certainly Xandr's largest advertising client. And so we're using a lot of technology. We have been a couple of things I've been the most proud of, and these certainly are not like things that John, have done alone. I've got a partner who was actually on a fireside chat a couple of weeks ago, I think, who referenced me, and I'll reference her.
Great, it's a great duo. But that's the right way to think.
Exactly. But the things that we're doing with addressable television, and not just picking up some service, but actually helping to really fine tune that, to take a channel that's been the mass, really mass of all mass, and get really down to the household level with some segments, so that we're vastly more relevant. I hesitate to say personalized, because it's not based upon what you've done, but it's vastly more relevant, and the returns are there. Like, you're seeing it really work, and we're able to communicate things that you couldn't do in a larger mass channel, obviously. The other that's been really interesting, that's with having an advertising organization that close, but also working with companies like yourself, is what we're doing with account-based marketing, and particularly on the business side. And too often business to what's called business to business marketing, which is a term I absolutely hate, because it's not my business building to your business building. It's like it's humans, it's human to human, connecting with each other. But we have done some really innovative things with combining data sets, always respecting the privacy and rules and everything there, but combining data sets so that we can communicate with specific companies that our sales teams are trying to connect with for particular reasons. But what we've been able to do on the advertising side is really watch the build out profiles of the decision makers in these companies. We're talking about thousands of companies. It's done at scale anonymously, but able to build out decision-making trees for those companies, and then watch intent signals. Is this particular company or this group of companies, are they all of a sudden, is there a bunch of research being done on a technology, on a topic that we have a solution for? And so as those happen, then we're spinning up a whole journey of awareness, education, and eventually sort of consideration type of advertising that would help them along. It's kind of in some ways sequential in some ways, but really trying to answer the questions that they're asking, right? We only are doing those things when those people at those companies are interested in those topics. And as a result, and I can't share the numbers here, obviously, but as a result, we are seeing a huge uplift in closed sales that we're influencing. And we've done testing to validate, hey, are you actually making a lift? And the lift is significant. And at the end of the day, it's nothing more than what I've talked about. It's having the right message at the right place at the right time, not because it's right for me, but it's right for the individuals that are searching for answers, that are trying to have an understanding, and just being there to say, hey, you're looking at different cybersecurity solutions for your big enterprise. Well, let us help you kind of on the things that be considered there, and ultimately, hey, maybe we can help you. But that's the approach. Very human, although done at a mass scale with data sets and lots of technology.
I mean, it's just an incredibly smart and sophisticated approach to doing something that, 10-ish years ago, basically you would have dropped copies of Wall Street Journal at people's offices, basically, to do that. But now at this point, you can really see content consumption patterns. You can look at things tied to, the IP address, basically fully anonymized, but look at the organization as a group and understand, as you noted, like what are surging topics, what's exciting to these people. Yeah. And then you can take, platform, actually like Xander's Curate platform, and we can create highly contextual, like audiences of people to reach people in the moment directly around those types of content that are going to influence them too. So
you're spot on. Like, I could geek out about this all day long, and I don't even consider myself to be the data person. That was my partners here a couple of weeks ago, but we all live in it and we all geek out about it. And if this has been the way, in my opinion, to be doing really audience specific advertising and marketing, it has been this way, it's been available. But as the carpet gets pulled out here really soon, I think you're going to have a lot of phone calls to yourself and to others, because while things are changing, there still are really smart, scalable ways to reach people. It's going to be different, but it's still pretty impressive, the kinds of results that you can deliver.
Yeah, exactly. What about new channels? Any new emerging channels? I mean, I think the topic of the day here is future media and emerging channels. Anything
right.
you're having fun experimenting with?
So we get to experiment with a bunch. I feel I regularly kind of go, okay, if you're like really blessed to be able to get access to most any kind of early, pre-beta tests that we want, which is pretty cool. Obviously can't do all of those. So I'll answer it a couple ways. Like personally, I'm really interested in the resurgence of what I would call long form, and maybe the fact that this year all of us have been sequestered out away and timed different, but a lot of longer form video formats, certainly audio and podcasting, but even print. And whether or not that's a little bit of a resurgence is it's not just in my mind. I know others are looking at it as well. I hope that it stays more thoughtful, a little less sensational types of formats. I think we need that. I think we need to be more thoughtful versus just the feed and what I glance and think is reality. But obviously, in terms of other platforms, I mentioned podcasting. I'll bring it up again. It's not new, right? It's been around for a long time, and then no one thought about it, and then it was kind of cool again. And for me, what makes it cool at this time is finally the ability to be able to measure it. It's been so scattered, or you just do it because it's kind of the place to be, and you would just pick a particular presenter and you kind of go there, and based upon downloads maybe. It's gotten better, and I hope that remains with the changes coming. So that one's been really interesting.
Well, I think that it could be similar to CTV in that it's driven by the scale that's finally been able to be achieved, and how cohesive you can now buy it. Now you can map audiences together. You can buy it at scale. You can look at granular aspects to be able to buy it potentially, and you can also do really sophisticated creative along with it. So it becomes a really interesting period. And when you think of something like podcasts, I mean, such an intimate medium, basically, to sort of have it in your ears and you feel like the people that are actually hosting it. I have some friends that run one called Adlandia for our industry. That's a really interesting one for people that I'll plug here. But I think that you're right. Podcast is certainly an interesting format to play with.
Yeah. And then we're looking at quite a few others. I'm sure that Clubhouse has been mentioned in every fireside chat for months now, and it's super interesting. I don't know where the advertisers come in, and it's the same for other platforms. And this goes into what I'm excited about in the changes is we all will need to be more relevant. The kind of DCO mentality that I'm sure that people here certainly are using, those who are listening are using DCO, but you're here because that there's other ways of doing things. So I don't want to pick on anyone who's listening, but speaking generically, it's that's the wrong approach, right? It needs to be, what you're going to do on TikTok might be through an influencer, or it might be through the influencer that you create. That could be an employee. It could be somebody that you put some media weight behind. There's lots of ways of going about it, but however you go about it, to do it thoughtfully, and it's for that platform and then the particular audiences that you're trying to communicate with. So it's a really fun time to be a marketer.
Yeah, this is actually asked within the last panel, but I don't know if you heard, like, is there a tipping point, like with TikTok, for example, in your case, where it goes beyond just being on your radar, but you understand, okay, we should put some resources behind it, and are there, or how do you consider that as a marketer?
Yeah, I know how I consider it, and how we consider it as a company will vary. So I'll focus more on me. It's listening more, right? Observing more initially, and then can I measure some activity there? And measurement isn't the hard gate that must be there. But if I don't have some way to measure, I have a hard time saying a dollar invested here is going to give me a better return than a dollar invested somewhere else.
Yep.
And that will very much limit your ability to move on. And we've seen it with other platforms. I remember seeing it, with Snap, and where it was like, hey, we need a few more things in order to try and blow this out. And then we're going to blow it out and see what actually occurs. And then without a measurement, then I can go, hey, is my approach wrong? Is the way I'm targeting wrong? And there's so many questions you can ask, but you just, without those tools, you're winging it, which is fun, and we should all do a certain amount of, but that measurement is a really important gate.
Yeah, that measurement, that learning, what can you draw out of it beyond just the experience of having run marketing on it or through it? And if you consider kind of the walled gardens comparatively, if you're going to be diversifying dollars, either away or towards other platforms potentially, what are you able to get out of it from an insights and measurement standpoint? How do you balance targetability versus the creative impact that you can have potentially on another platform that's interesting?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, you have a percentage of your budget that's really about experimentation, where you can go in places where things aren't really clear. But we just need to be careful that we don't play into the stereotype of marketing just doing the cool, flashy things and there's no substance. We have to have that substance. And so as you look at new platforms, it doesn't mean that we're going to be pulling dollars that I can measure, returns that I can measure on some of the walled gardens that people love to hate, because there are returns. But it'd be silly not to be out experimenting and realizing, okay, that company's spending a lot of time with the federal government in multiple countries. We should probably be looking at something else.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good segue to a question that just arose from the audience here. So how about corporate purpose? When you think about your role, is there a way in which corporate purpose and what AT&T is doing, what you can do as a corporate entity, kind of factors into the way that you think about marketing?
I think that's an awesome question, because as I talk about being human, it's not just talking to someone in a way or answering their questions and to be human, right? People need to understand about what you stand for and who you are. And that's more than just the things you sell. It's why you create them. It's how you take care of your employees. It's the impact that you have in the world around you. And so it is a significant part of what makes AT&T what it is. I happen to be in the central marketing organization, where we are very, very focused on what we would like the brand to stand for. And nobody is in denial that brands, ultimately the definition of a brand is not what the brand says, it's what people say. Yeah. And so constantly listening to that and adjusting and being, just incessantly customer focused and doing everything we can to improve on all the touch points I talked about earlier is really important. But then as a company with hundreds of thousands of employees, what are the things we stand for? And with that many employees, you're going to have people from all walks of life and all backgrounds. So you'll see us involved in all those things. Broadly, diversity and inclusion, you have to have both, are super key. This last year, we released a report that had more detail than what you'll see most companies that showed what diversity looks like at various companies at different management levels, to be very transparent. Not to say that we were perfect, not at all, but to be very clear about where we are. And in some measures, we're ahead of our industry, but no one would say that's perfect. What we're saying is it is critical, and that we're committed to being, to representing the types of diverse communities that we, are blessed to be able to service to call customers.
Yeah, I think you have a particularly unique subset of customers. I mean, it's a vast, group of customers, but you have so many interesting ways to connect with them. The technologies, the entertainment, sort of like the ways in which you, as a company, can speak to your customers. That affords you that opportunity to be really empathetic marketer too, and to really listen to them through what channels you can as well.
Yep.
Another question from the audience here. How should quote unquote older brands gracefully enter new technology spaces?
Interesting question. So I think I'd answer it two ways. Gracefully, it sounds like there's probably, some history behind that. Maybe the person's asking a question about how do you evolve maybe ways that people have done things for a long time.
Well, I think they give examples to give you additional examples such as TikTok, esports as well. So it's about the brand being older as well as potentially maybe the consumers are younger. How do you speak to younger audiences on younger audiences' terms potentially in a way that doesn't feel forced?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I worked at a company that wanted to make what we felt like was a pretty big pivot away from what had been their core. And everyone, the board, current leadership, across everyone was aligned on where the company needed to go. But it was the debate was really about how you got there. And my role at the time in marketing, particularly owning our social channels where we had really healthy communities, like our base was there and active. And we were super engaged with them, to the point where we were out, like we would do regular meetups, with our top customers and fans. They'd get access to things before journalists and analysts would. Like, they were very much part of the process. We wanted their feedback. So here we are wanting to make this pivot. So you've been here, you want to make a pivot. And we brought them along, both our customers, and then internally, we brought them along so they felt that they were still part of it while we added a segment or two to the mix. And then internally it was, hey, I know where you want to go. Here's a path for the next year. And here are the checkpoints that we're going to come in and just make sure that we don't need more time, or that we don't need to go and adjust. Even the oldest brands or people that have grown up in a company and like have maybe one way or what's seemingly a fixed way of doing things, like, bringing them a path to go and test and prove it works. It still is uncomfortable, but it can work, and you can do it without having to damage current relationships. And then I think the steps along the way, and I'm going back to where we were with this company, is the path we ended up taking was a little bit different. And that was how it should have been. I probably wouldn't have articulated initially. I was like, here's the path, we're going to do it. It's going to be all this time. And then we're like, well, we're moving this way and that way. But it was respected because we were coming back in and using some data and a lot of customer verbatims to guide leadership on that pivot.
Yeah, I think you want to find out where you have permission to go as a brand, and where, you've talked a lot about the idea of marketing as a kind of a service to your clients. Like, if you think of some of these different platforms, these different areas that might be new. It's like, what does AT&T mean to these either communities or, the people within them, for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Testing and communicating seems like the right approach. Any brands that you particularly look up to in the media space? You noted REI, I think, is that great initial anecdote. Anyone more contemporary that you see that, when it's talking about doing exciting things in emerging spaces that you think is doing a good job?
It's somebody who likes brands with challenges. I'm really interested in what some of the established brands are doing. Looking at GM right now is really interesting, what they're doing with Cadillac and Hummer in moving to all electric vehicles. And not just because they've got sort of flashy emotional ads, but I'm just fascinated on how you pivot from kind of your grandparents' big Cadillac, huge vehicle, right, to the very much technology first green initiatives. It's just a really interesting time to see those brands pivot. And I'm sure there are lots of other examples, but you're talking about industries that have been a certain way for a long time. If you wanted to make changes in automotive, it was a decade in the planning, huge investments to looking at a whole new technologies, but then looking at your car kind of in the same way that you look at a phone and like, let's launch it, let's update software updates. And certainly Tesla has certainly helped open that door. And they'll be very, very interesting. But these other companies are with scale, going to be really fun to keep watching.
Yeah, the challenge of having to actually create the vehicles and the timeline that goes into production and the research and everything along with the challenges of marketing makes it a particularly exciting marketing challenge in how you communicate to your audiences as well.
Absolutely.
My son is clamoring for my attention right now.
That's great. You should have him join us. That's my policy for this new world. It's like family. Come on in and give a point of view. So, we've had one person who works for me, a 6-year-old daughter comes in and comments on advertising, and it's great. And then when he leaves his computer, she jumps up and starts talking to us. So it's wonderful.
Yep.
Well, guys, embracing the change.
Thanks so much for the great session. So the bane of my existence working from home have been my dogs, who are fortunately at the groomer right now. So I have an issue, but they love barking. So great session.
They're at the spa, Marty. I think it's referred to as the spa for them.
Yeah, spa, right? Puppy spa. So a couple of great things. First of all, John, besides you owning our household, both from a phone and an internet standpoint, we're customers, but love REI, have had a very good personal experience. I can see you're using your tent by all those wonderful photographs you have in the background, which I'm assuming were taken while using.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So kudos to you. It's great family time. We love it. We actually love camping. Dynamic creative also, I think, in the personalization. It's funny. I worked at a company a couple of years ago that was really kind of trying to really dive into dynamic creative. A couple of things. We found that brands weren't yet ready for it yet, but the technology also hasn't really gotten there yet. We here at Quantcast have been able to figure some of that out, but it's more on a one-off basis. So I don't think anybody's really at scale figured that out. But and then so to answer your question though, Ted, on the first digital ad, do you know who sold that first digital ad?
Rick Boyce.
Rick Boyce, exactly.
Rick Boyce, yeah.
Yes, Rick Boyce. So it was so funny when you brought that up. I was like, wait a minute, I know the answer to that question in terms of who sold that. So
that's right. He was at Quantcast in corporate sales for a bit.
He was. I actually worked for Rick at Monster many years ago. So he loves telling that story. And I have one last quick anecdote. I actually was at CBS Sportsline. I sold the first Nagano Olympic deal to Shell Oil Company. They had bought 10 million impressions and they had one piece of creative, and it was all over the site. And like everybody in like the head of the, like Marty, get them to have another piece of creative because it was just all over the site. It was hilarious, but those were the early days, right?
That's right.
Anyway,
Yep.
guys,
Right.
well, thank you so much. It was a great session. John, Ted, really appreciate you guys taking
Thank
the time
you.
today to join
Thank you, John. Great to see you. We'll
All right.
speak soon.
Yep.
Take care,
See
Marty.
y'all.
Bye.
Thanks.
Take care. Bye, Ted. Bye, John. So, we have some time for, we've had some great sessions so far. We've got some more ahead of us today. So a quick overview before we welcome our next speaker. We're going to be hearing from Mars, Dove, Bose, and Kellogg. And for our next session, I want to welcome Heather Stuckey. Heather is the Global Head of Digital Partnerships for Mars. The session is going to be moderated by Victoria Druckmann. And Victoria is the Director of Sales at Tremor Video. So welcome to the stage, Heather and Victoria.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Heather, how are you doing today?
Hi, good. How are you?
Good. So I thought just to kind of kick us off a little bit, it would be helpful to understand a bit more about your roles within Mars and kind of how Ignition Labs fits within there, if you don't mind giving us a little bit of background to kick things off.
Absolutely. So it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to our discussion. I lead our Mars Inc.'s global strategic partnerships with Google, Facebook, and Amazon, as well as other digital platforms, including Snap, Twitter, and TikTok. What this basically means is that I work with each of the platforms to develop the strategic roadmap and KPIs in collaboration with the segments, which includes pet care, confectionery, and food, to drive value and accelerate business growth. I'm also the creator of Ignition Labs, as you mentioned, and Ignition Labs is really created out of the realization that we weren't moving fast enough to keep up with the pace of the ever-changing, evolving media landscape. So whether it be a new format on an existing platform or a completely new platform altogether, we needed to create a system that would enable us to keep at the leading edge of innovation with regard to content, media, and commerce. So really the purpose of Ignition Labs is to accelerate our rollout onto these new platforms or to get deeper into existing ones and looking at what consumer behaviors we need to pay attention to unlock that full value.
Sounds exciting. Definitely a lot of different moving factors within the role and kind of overseeing two divisions that work seamlessly together, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Obviously, there's a lot over the past year. There's been a lot of new changes, even just within social channels and different products that exist to be able to communicate with consumers. How, when you guys are looking at embracing a new platform or a new channel, what are some of the criteria that you and your team look at to evaluate what brand makes sense from within the Mars portfolio? How do you want to interact with that channel? How are you going to find consumers on that channel?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So we look at it we take a very much an outside-in approach to it. So first, we look at it from two different angles. So one is looking at it from a consumer behavior point of view. So understanding what types of actions they're taking online and where does our brand have the right to play in that space. So what's picking up traction, particularly among younger audiences, which are always a little bit harder to reach. And then the second is, from a platform perspective, what is that new buzzy platform that we need to pay attention to? And is it encouraging different types of behaviors of what we're currently seeing? So TikTok is a great example that, I think we've talked a lot about over the past couple of years. And then Clubhouse is probably the kind of the new one that we're starting to look at. And so from there, then we say, after we've determined the platform and the consumer behavior we want to go after, then we determine, okay, what market is that platform really picking up a lot of traction in? So once we've chosen the market, then we go into what segment and brand is the best fit for that. So it's very much a kind of a different way of looking. It's not looking at a brand first and then the platform. It's actually completely opposite, but it because we look at it from a different way, it just enables us to develop different types of tests, because what we don't want to do is keep chasing shiny object, because that kind of becomes an endless cycle. What we want to be able to do is take notice of what's happening and then figure out, how does this apply to our brands, and what do we aim to learn on that? I think the key also is that we want to go beyond just traditional off-the-shelf media formats and activations and sponsorships, and we really want to understand, how can we authentically connect with consumers in new and different ways? So I'd say just a quick example of that is we've been in the gaming space for a couple of years with Twitch, but what we wanted to understand is, how do we integrate our Twix brand? That's always a tongue twister, to find the right balance of brand and product integration into gaming content. So what we had done in the past is leverage the media formats that Twitch just offers as a general package, but what we wanted to do was understand, how do we integrate Mars into that gaming environment in a way that that consumers or users acknowledge or accept, right? Because we also don't want to interrupt that experience. And so what I find exciting about that is that not only were we the most branded UK live stream over the past 12 months, but we also were able to scale that right back into the business immediately to optimize existing campaigns in other markets. And that's kind of the cycle that we're trying to achieve with these tests.
That makes sense. And because I would imagine that there's a need to have authenticity to appearing in new channels and finding the right brand within the portfolio, given you have 3 rather robust portfolios, lines of businesses across confections, pet care, and the foods. Are there specific channels, or are there, I guess, examples of when you feel like you've needed to take a step back before going to market because you've realized through kind of testing that perhaps the right brand or the right creative wasn't being paired with the channel? And how do you pivot in those situations?
Yeah, I think TikTok is probably a good example in the sense that from a platform, we're still trying to figure out how to work with that platform, because obviously it's very UGC driven. Obviously hashtags challenges are hugely popular. And so we've done a few hashtag challenges, but what we had to do is take a step back from that and figure out, how do we work with creators on that platform? We know we need to be there, and we know our brands are already there, whether we're leading that conversation or not. And so what we wanted to do is create an environment for our brands that we could test in a relatively safe way. So obviously brand safety is hugely important to us. And so what we did was work with creators on developing content that we then boosted with paid media. So that is an example of where we went out with hashtag challenges, and then we kind of had to pull it back a little bit to focus on elements within the platform that we had a little bit more control on, at least to run more tests on and figure out what our ways of working are and how we should approach it. But what we're very keen on doing is not necessarily to just walk away from a platform altogether, but it's more of just figuring out what the right balance is, and how do we walk on that journey together versus start out with a sprint.
Yeah, that makes sense. It takes time to trial and error and see, I would imagine, even which brands are going to be well received within different environments, especially when you start to think about the audience differences that you find between those different platforms.
For sure. Yeah. And even what the audiences and also what they want to see on the platform. So obviously from a TikTok perspective, it's a lot more, it's the content's raw versus on an Instagram, it's more polished. So even figuring out how we approach that environment in a different way.
That makes sense. yeah, the creative needs to feel organic within the environment that it's in. And I would imagine for brands with some of the heritage that the Mars brands have, there's been a trial and error period of getting comfortable with some of the rawness of the creative and the UGC environments.
Yes, for sure. And it has to align with our 5 principles as a company, as well as our overall marketing code. So there's a lot of elements that go into making sure that that platform and that environment is right for us.
And how do you what's the role of your team in kind of taking those learnings from different platforms or from some of these early pilot programs with a new platform like a TikTok or others, and disseminate those within the organization once you get some of the findings from your early pilot programs, and determine how or what other brands within the portfolios make sense to kind of explore a TikTok or another platform with next?
Yeah, so we work with once we've identified the brand and the market that we want to target and the platform that we want to go after, we bring the team, that local market team, along on the journey. So that's the first step. The second step is, it's usually not out of the blue of what we're looking like, the platforms that we look at and the consumer behavior that we're looking to test. So for gaming, for example, that was something that our confectionery teams had been doing a lot of work on, but they were approaching it more from that traditional media format perspective. And so in working with them, it was figuring out, how do we drive that deeper integration? Another example is a test that we did on Reddit, where we wanted to understand how we could integrate our Temptations cat treat brand into conversations that were already happening about cats in subreddit groups. Our goal was actually to drive cat adoption. So it wasn't about driving brand sales. And that was part of the strategy, because we know within Reddit groups, there's a high ad avoidance feeling. And, it's that you can't just come into a Reddit group and start advertising product straight up. So what we were able to do was garner valuable audience insights around driving this cat adoption, which ladders up to our overall purpose as our Mars Pet Care team, which is to eradicate pet homelessness. So it was very much aligned with our purpose and our vision as a segment. And we were able to get audience insights and upvotes on our content from users who claim that they would never upvote content from brands. And so from that test, the local market team was then able to take that learning and expand it to a bigger test within Reddit. So that's typically how, and that's actually like a huge focus of us, is it's great to run these tests, but if they're not relevant to the markets or the brands, then it's kind of a waste of time. So it's all about choosing tests that the teams can then get behind and expand once we've kind of figured out how to work and develop a playbook around that platform, and really make all the mistakes up front, so that we can then, so that it just creates a easier road ahead for the markets that are looking to learn a little bit more. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that idea of driving impact and having the relevance for the brand, and the Reddit example just sounds like, in that case, you guys were really hitting all the right notes, right? You were authentic to the space. It made sense for the audience that you were trying to reach in a way that didn't necessarily feel like branded advertising, which you knew through evaluation wasn't going to work in that environment. And it required a little bit of a different approach. And in that case, the focus on the personalization of the messaging, the driving impact, more sort of moment marketing that's a little bit more focused, less on product, more on experience, was something that was really going to resonate in that environment.
Yeah. And for that particular example, we didn't even put any product shots on there. It was all about, we actually worked with a bunch of local shelters that had these actual cats up for adoption. So we featured pictures of cats that were available, waiting to get adopted. So it was a very, it definitely aligned with our purpose and our overall goals of eradicating pet homelessness. in a way that was also true to that felt authentic for the brand.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that kind of lends itself to one of the other questions that I've been wondering about after initially connecting, which is there's been a lot of change over the last 12 months for consumers. The way that each of the kind of 3 lines of business probably was positioned for that change was very different. There's obviously been tons and countless stories talking about shelters that were emptied out last spring as more people were realizing they were going to be home and they wanted company at home. How has the last 12 months influenced how you see your customers? I'm sure it's a little bit different whether you're looking at confections or pet care, as well as food prep. What have you kind of learned about your consumers over the last 12 months that might have been different, that have influenced how you kind of speak to them and what you're looking to engage with them around?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So when last spring, when lockdown came into full effect, we realized that there were tons of questions around, if I use pet care as an example, tons of questions around pets and COVID in general. And so what we did was through our Google partnership, we figured out kind of what the top search queries were around pets and COVID-19. And then 10 days later, we came out with a chatbot experience called the Pet Health Pal that we launched on Facebook through Messenger and WhatsApp and which was powered by our Waltham Pet Care Science Institute. And we ran it in the US and in the UK. And it was really, the goal was to connect pet parents with relevant content from a trusted source and to dispel that misinformation around the virus and pets. And it was just a massive step change of how we approached content development in general. And it was a great example of how we were leveraging data and innovation to drive value quickly. We know that to your point, there were a lot of people that were adopting pets, not knowing where to start. And because we have that full ecosystem from the veterinary hospitals that we own all the way down to pet products that we sell, it felt like an easy place for us to drive that leadership and that overall conversation around how do we make sure that these pet parents are informed with the right information that would help them move forward with how they approached either raising a pet for the first time or figuring out what the virus and their pet, what it meant with the virus and their pet specifically. So that's just one example of ways that we've had to pivot from a confectionery point of view. It was all about making sure that that our products were readily available to people. One of the things that we found is that during lockdown, people were craving, they wanted to be able to help and drive those, just be able to gift and give, especially for the frontline workers, is treating others, even though they couldn't do that in person. So we were able to launch what we called the Snickers System of Gratitude as one example. We also launched a similar campaign with M&Ms, but focusing on how do we enable people from their homes, from the safety of their own homes, to recognize and reward frontline workers as well as neighbors and friends, and drive that gifting experience in a safe way.
It's a great initiative, and one that I'm sure also they're all kind of great examples of the brand is kind of secondary almost to the messaging that you're doing, right? That a lot of it's more about connecting with the world around you and connecting with your consumers in a way that's really relevant and meaningful to them at that moment, not necessarily just pushing the product. As consumers and kind of like their journey from when they're first exposed to a brand online, whatever channel that might be, to when they are going to encounter it in a store has kind of evolved over the last 12 months. And that consumer journey has shortened in a way. What impact has that had on the actual messaging that you're doing for more branded campaigns?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we obviously approach it differently for our different brands, but our main goal is to make the consumer experience with our brands to be as frictionless as possible. So if we look at, a big source of inspiration is what's happening in China, to see where we will be in the next 3 to 4 years, where you can literally order a single Snickers bar off JD or Tmall and have it delivered to your home within 15 minutes. So when we think about that, how do we shorten that, understanding that we need to create that frictionless experience? How do we enable that within our brand? So an example that we have is our M&M's brand has been in e-commerce for years, selling personalized M&M's. Last week, Forrester announced that M&M's runs the best-in-class D2C website, which is super exciting. But figuring out how are we there in front of the consumer at moments where they're most open to hearing from the brand and driving that purchase. So whether it be shopping for, being there with search results of when they're shopping for different types of party favors. Obviously that has kind of reduced over the past year, but what are some gifting opportunities that people can be giving virtually? And figuring out where are those moments for those natural purchases to be made, and having our products be available for that shoppable experience. So one of the things that we did early on too was ensure that all of our social creative was shoppable, and leveraging the power of Facebook to ensure that we could drive that frictionless conversion as much as possible.
That makes sense. Obviously, shoppable became key over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
Have you seen that influence kind of a change? Obviously, making sure that the creative itself is shoppable, but in the messaging, and has Mars considered kind of embracing the change in the actual creative itself and the scenes that you're depicting and kind of speaking to consumers? Or are you finding it more successful to kind of continue with like a status quo of how you're talking to consumers?
I think we're always looking at ways of how do we drive emotion out of consumers. So whether it's to make people laugh, cry, or drive some kind of to just become some kind of service. So that's really like the core elements of what we are all about, that you'll see in all of our creative work. We did launch a pretty big new marketing mandate called Building Brands for Mutual Value, to ensure that we're harnessing the power of our brands to create shared value for the people, pets, and partners that we serve. So for example, one of the things that we did for Halloween this year was we launched this app called Treetown. And it was in service of our Mars Wrigley purpose to make people smile. And knowing that Halloween looked a little bit different last year, Treetown was launched in the US, and it was a digital experience for families to virtually trick or treat for real candy. And it was like this full-on virtual Halloween portal that really enabled, it was kind of a gamification of sorts. And it really just enabled people to still maintain that joy of Halloween, but to celebrate in a safe and COVID-friendly way. So again, it's just one example of how we've been able to pivot. I think another good example is the pedigree work that we launched initially on Zoom, where it's literally called Dogs on Zoom. And it was kind of similar to what I was talking about with Reddit, but it was connecting potential adopters with shelter dogs virtually. And so it was, the shelters would be on Zoom, and the potential adopters would be looking at those dogs that were available. We have since then also extended that to Clubhouse, and to allow people, and running sessions to allow people to pick potential dogs to hopefully drive adoption within that. So those are just some examples of how we've pivoted our messaging to be more relevant. I would say the other thing that we're doing too is we're really starting to experiment on how to become more relevant with even some of the products that we're developing. So through our global partnership with Google, we worked with Google Cloud to develop our first ever Maltesers AI cake. And this was in the UK. So what we were doing is really leveraging AI to push into a more creative space by listening to consumer intent and purchase and preference to ensure that our brands could connect in contextually relevant ways. So we had a Google Cloud engineer literally create this whole machine learning model using hundreds of existing recipes from everything from tray bakes to scones to develop this new cake creation. And this AI cake, which is technically a cakey, which is it's a hybrid between a cookie and a cake, was created based on Google search trends of what people were looking for. And then we actually created this Marmite infused buttercream frosting based again on Google search trends and trying to figure out what would resonate the most with consumers. So something that we just launched this past week for Easter in the UK. And it was just a really interesting, different way of thinking about recipe development and giving consumers a new way of looking at a recipe or, a combination of ingredients. I mean, I would never have put Maltesers and Marmite together, but just thinking about how we can use science and the great resources we have with Google into and develop more creative driven ideas based on that. So it was super, it was just a completely different way of looking at recipe development as another example.
Definitely seems like a local delicacy to the UK market, but a very different way. And I'm sure for the brand, it's also just different, right? You don't typically think of some of the confectionery brands as being within the recipe game, but it was an opportunity for you guys to be in a different space and speak to consumers through kind of a different lens. How, as different countries, of course, are coming out of lockdowns at different speeds and kind of embracing the next chapter a little bit differently. How do you see the creativity and the way you're engaging with consumers continue to evolve? The more personalization, is this something that you see continuing to be a trend, the shortened consumer journey that you need to lead?
Yeah, I mean, everything that we are doing, it needs to be meaningfully personal to the consumers that we serve. So we're very much looking at, how and through our marketing mandate of building brands for mutual value, how do we, it's a constant question that we have in terms of how do we engage with consumers in different ways. And so, as people come out of lockdown, obviously there's going to be a lot more people are going to be wanting to be out and social and about. And so, one of the areas is gum. So it's something that probably a lot of people didn't really think about during lockdown because of the reduction of social interactions and social visits. But coming out of lockdown, how do we make sure that our gum messaging makes sense and is relevant? And that's something that we're actively working on, and more to come on that soon. But making sure that the product is available not only through the work that we're doing with Facebook and other social channels, but also being available physically where people are interacting and trying to catch up for lost time with their friends.
Yeah, and I would imagine that in the past where you might have had a broader target, right? Kind of for gum, it was anyone essentially needed gum. There might be a shift in how you're looking to segment down those audiences with different, with different stages of comfort that people will even have and how you're going to be talking to them creatively.
Yeah, like one example is dating. So how do we, based on behavior online, knowing that if people are single and wanting to get out and date again, that messaging would obviously be a lot different than a family getting together for the first time in months. So we're very much looking at how do we develop creative that is relevant to the audiences that we want to target and serve.
Makes sense. And when you're kind of creating these different, whether it's different channels, different creative messaging, looking beyond, obviously for some of the examples you've given, some great examples around the personalization, whether it's Zoom and dogs or Reddit and cats, when you are looking beyond simply driving purchase intent, how are you guys looking to evaluate the success there? Are there metrics that you are looking for kind of to see a new channel proving out its success or a new creative strategy proving out success that you'll continue to look at over the next year?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the platform, right? Because we're very evidence-based marketers. So our ultimate measure of success is if it's a regular campaign, it's did this drive sales lift, right? But then obviously, TikTok, for example, is just rolling out its sales lift capabilities in the US. So when we're looking at some platforms that don't have that, Clubhouse definitely doesn't have sales lift capabilities yet. So it's really about driving that connection and figuring out how, from the adoption perspective, that would be the KPI. There would be what number of how many dogs did we get adopted through that campaign. And so it really depends on the creative and what that overall objective is. But I would say that for us, it's all about, we actually don't really look as much at like purchase intent or brand lift, because it's more of what consumers say they're going to do versus what they actually do. And we found that sometimes that can be different. So it's really more, what is the evidence that an action was taken, whether that be through a sales lift or through, from a purpose-driven focus, the number of dogs or cats adopted off of Reddit, Clubhouse, Zoom, et cetera.
Different platforms.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes sense. And I would imagine, just you were mentioning earlier, kind of the role of emotion for Mars, right? That a lot of the creative you're doing is designed to evoke some sort of emotion, knowing that emotion is really one of the strongest kind of drivers of human behavior. And that I would imagine that depending on the emotion that you're looking to evoke with the particular piece of creative, that would influence what you're actually looking at as to see a success. That success does not necessarily, as you just said, correspond to sales alone, that there are other metrics that can lend itself to your campaign feeling successful.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Are there any, I guess, just kind of as we start to wrap up and get closer to 2 o'clock, are there any channels that you, or I guess any brands that you think have exciting kind of upcoming launches within channels that you are eager to see how they play out in the next few months?
So I think, we are, as I mentioned, we have done an initial test on Clubhouse, still really keen to understand a little bit more about that space and also how it can scale to other brands. So we did it with Pedigree, but now trying to figure out what does that look like for confectionery as an example. And then we're also looking at, knowing that the social commerce space is huge. So figuring out how do we connect with consumers in that environment. And so if you look at like TikTok, for example, where they did their first live stream with Walmart at the end of last year, what could that possibly look like for our brands? We did the chatbot work. We're looking to also get a little bit more understanding of where messaging can play a bigger role in our overall brand conversation. And so that's another area of exploration, but more to come in this space for sure. And we're still very much looking. So if anybody has any other ideas, I'd love to hear them.
Great. And I'm not sure if we have time. We do have one question that came through where if Marty, we're out of time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Well, thanks so much, Heather and Victoria. Great session. really, I think from our standpoint, really covers the gambit from, confectionery to pets. I love really a wide spectrum there. And I love the Twix commercial recently where I keep seeing on commercial where the lady takes a bite out and the guy opens one and it magically he only gets one. The other thing too, Heather, I was wondering, and it's come up a lot, and obviously I think many of us have been on it, is Clubhouse, but I think you've alluded to it. I think, I was talking with a friend of mine who works at Wells Fargo on the social media side, and like bringing brands into it right now, I think is like so nascent. It's like really kind of, how do you really, the way I kind of have viewed it is it's almost like an audio LinkedIn almost, because in some cases it's like it's very business focused, but it really does, you talked about dating also, because it really runs the gambit all the way to like a more pure social media standpoint. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about Clubhouse from a brand perspective, and if that's something you guys will ever get into if they have it available.
Yeah, I mean, Clubhouse is definitely an interesting one, because I think when we talk about being authentic as a brand, it's like what business does Snickers have to do, hosting a conversation on Clubhouse? But I do think that we were really successful with it on the pedigree work that we did, where it was linking people to potential dogs to get adopted. So that's the lens that we're really looking at for Clubhouse is how do we become of service to the users and the consumers we want to reach. And I think that's a much, we would never get on a club, without having paid media or format opportunities. We would never just come on and tell people to buy a Snickers bar, though I'm sure a lot of people would enjoy that. But that's not what we're looking to do. But I think there's, we've been having a lot of internal conversations of the areas that we could cover. There's so much potential there, and so it's just figuring out what makes the most sense, and most importantly, how do we show up in an authentic way?
I think that's the hardest part that brands are trying to figure out, is like in an authentic way, because it's a very nuanced sort of experience. But
exactly.
And listen, also I was really glad to hear what Mars has been doing from a giving back perspective. I thought that was really wonderful. I wasn't aware of that, so I thought that was great. So anyway, well, listen, thank you so much. We appreciate you guys joining us and taking the time out of your day to be on with us at the Brand Innovators Summit.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And for our next fireside chat, I am thrilled to introduce Erin Goldson, who is the brand manager on the Dove team at Unilever. The session is going to be moderated by Adam Cadet, who is the director of private programmatic advertising sales at Zynga. Welcome to the stage, Erin and Adam.
Hello, thanks for having us.
There's Adam.
Hi there. Thank you, Marty.
Adam, I love the fireside chat background.
Yes.
You killed it.
This is the perfect background for today.
All right, guys. Have a great session.
Thank you. Marty, thank you. And thanks to Brand Innovators. Great programming as always. I really liked the last session with Heather and Victoria. Erin, great to see you today. Our topic of discussion is the future of media, emerging media channels. Before we do that, could you tell us a little more about the specifics of your role? Because I think that'll set the scene very well for our listeners today.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me. So I am Erin Goldson. I'm a brand manager working on Dove, which is one of the many brands under the Unilever umbrellas. We have Dove, Shea Moisture, Tresemme. So I have the privilege of working on Dove, and I'm in a hybrid role. So one half of my role is really focused on the purpose work that is really the growth engine of Dove. So anytime there's a campaign that isn't specific to a product and more around kind of our point of view on beauty, we believe that beauty inclusivity, showing different versions of beauty is very important. So that's what I work on the purpose side. During COVID, all of the campaigns around Black Lives Matter, some of the campaigns we did around COVID, that's something that came out of the purpose team, which we call master brand internally. So overlooking all the different categories and kind of coming up with different communications that can work across whether that's Theo's hair, etc. And then the other aspect of my job is I'm also on the Dove Hair innovation team. So that's all around looking at white space opportunities, seeing what our competitors are doing, and figuring out what the future of hair innovation is going to look like. So literally creating products from start to finish, brainstorming what that packaging is going to look like, what the proposition is going to be, working with supply chain, working with the R&D, and then really bringing that product to market for our consumers.
Thank you, Erin. When we talked before, it was great to speak with you earlier this week to get a sense of what you're working on and how you're evaluating, emerging media channels. Heather and Victoria were just talking about Clubhouse and experimenting there and trying to connect with consumers in different ways. And then also your sort of tried and true, more mature platforms are evolving. The use case for them is changing. But regardless of new or sort of mature platforms, you talked about the lens of purpose a moment ago. Can you tell us sort of from a high level, sort of how that's the ethos of Unilever and Dove, and how you're using the lens of purpose to evaluate how you communicate with consumers, and then B, how you decide to use different platforms?
Yep. So I think as a company, Unilever, one of the things we often say are brands with purpose grow. And so we've been tasked to look across all of our different brands internally. So whether that's Dove or other brands, really evaluate where they are in their purpose journey. So a brand like Dove for Unilever is one that's a lot more established. I think people think of us when it comes to purpose. Usually we are case studies that people look to, or even a brand that even internally, I'm constantly getting asked questions on KPIs. How are you guys measuring purpose and learnings there? So I think it's nice because for Dove, this has just been something that we have done for quite a long time. And it's really this idea of making the idea of beauty universally accessible to all women. So that's showing women with different hair textures, different skin tones, different body shapes, different body, really making sure that we continue to expand on that definition of beauty and portray that not only in front of the camera with the campaigns that we're working on, but also behind the scenes, making sure that we have diverse advertisers and agencies that we're working with. And so as we look at different media and channels, I think for us, the hardest thing is a lot of times purpose assets and getting that purpose message can't always be done in 15 seconds or 30 seconds. Finding long form channels and ways to help really tell that purpose story is something that we've been leaning into. So it's a mix of using the traditional channels like TV, etc., but then also leaning into PR and organic content to help share those longer form assets where we can give a bit more background and share a bit more on what that purpose and our point of view is. So for us, it's that storytelling. It's not just selling an ad with a quick display, a display unit, but really thinking about how can we tell impactful stories. And the way we look at it from a Dove perspective is we kind of think about it in 4 different pillars. So we have the brand say, that's what the brand might say. That might be your typical advertising. That might be a print ad, a YouTube spot, but it's all things that the brand is saying about what purpose means to us. Then we have the brand do. We believe that it's easy to say, I stand for hair inclusivity, or I stand for diversity in front of the camera, but making sure that you're actually putting action behind what you're saying. So again, when we think about channels, it's not always the typical, like I think we've really started to bend the rules there. So one of the initiatives that I'm leading is our work on the Crown Act. So Dove is a proud co-founder of the Crown Coalition, which is a group of 3 other organizations that are championing anti-hair discrimination. And when we think about channels there, we're actually working to make legislative changes. We have to work with lobbyists. We have to think about what are different ways to get our messages out so that we can make sure that the work we're doing is also impacting legislation. That's just an example. And then back to the framework, so we have brand say and brand do. So the legislative change would fall under brand do. And then we have what's called others say and others do. How can we use the voices of others to help get the mission and purpose of Dove out? So an influencer or a partner might be an example of an other say. How do we use their equity to drive that brand that brand purpose along?
So you mentioned obviously purpose is the core of everything you do. Has that ethos evolved over the past year, or sort of going back to your pillars on the how, when you're trying to activate your influencers or your larger Dove community, is that constantly changing these days?
Yeah, I think we're constantly trying to push ourselves further when we talk about purpose and what that looks like. And one of the things we talk about is this idea of being an actionist brand. And so if you look at how our purpose has evolved, again, it's always been the core of the brand, but I think this whole pillar of brand do and others do is more critical, more than ever for Dove. So I think at one point we were more of just saying, like I think one of the iconic campaigns is our Real Beauty campaign that was in Times Square, where we showed women of all shapes and sizes. There wasn't necessarily a do associated with that. If that were to come out now, we'd probably be looking at, is there any legislation we can do, or is there any type of training and curriculums that we can do around body inclusivity, making sure that we actually have tangible actions beyond just the campaigns that we're running. So I think that is something that has been exciting to see, that like we are doing things like changing legislation. We talk internally a lot about how changing legislation, changing laws changes lives. And I think that's a space that we're leaning into a lot more, is not just showing the campaigns on TV, but making sure that there's work behind the scenes that everyone might not even be aware of, but is critical to the work and the messages that we're doing.
When you've been activating and seeing success with this sort of this actionist audience and consumer, are there newer platforms or partners you've been able to team up with to see any sort of success? And how are you measuring that? Is it signing petitions, having consumers take action? Are there any other, back end metrics or measurement you're also looking to here?
Yep. So, for example, some of the work that we're doing around the legislative work, every year we track kind of what are the states where we want to see laws change. What are the states where we think we'll be able to have immediate success? What are the states that will kind of come at a later point? And we track that. We see how we're doing. If you go to thecrownact.com, and on the right-hand corner, you can find the petition. Right now we have a little over, I think it's 254,000 signatures. Our goal for this year is to get 500,000 signatures. So how do we get people to not just watch our ads, but when they see what we're putting out there, they're actually taking an action to help support us in the work that we're doing. And then on top of that, we also have a lot of brand metrics we're able to look at. So are people associating the work that we're doing with Dove? What is that association? And then there's a number of other metrics that we look at. So we actually have metrics where we can look at how is Dove's purpose evaluated against competitors. Are we growing in that space? And then we also can look at different audiences. So how are our messages resonating with maybe the general market consumer versus the Black consumer? We've noticed actually that with the A consumer, they really are the ones who over-index in believing in what Dove says when it comes to our purpose, when it comes to our communication. I think they are a consumer that has grown up on Dove with Dove and using that in their households. And I think we continue to build trust with that demographic.
So with these actionist groups that you're building trust, are you finding they're able to also, they're sort of being their own micro influence and amplifying the work that you're doing, whether it's in their own household or their social groups?
Yep, exactly. Some of these mini micro influencers that we're not paying, but feel very strongly, feel passionate about the work, and they're sharing that. And that's also something we look at, is how do we actually get our Dove community to engage in what we're doing, share our messages, and get that word out within their own communities.
Well, we already have some good Q&A I wanted to quickly touch on before we moved on. Someone asked, do you research the demographics of different media platforms outside of age, geography, race, religion, nationality, etc.? How does it inform the content that you're creating around these programs and then you go syndicate?
We research, so looking at demographics beyond race.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of, so maybe more of like psychographics.
Yeah, that's what I think they're getting at.
Yes, I mean, we have an incredible media team. We work very closely with Mindshare, and it's nice because they work across all of our brands. So we have lots of data on these platforms in terms of who is that consumer. We try to cut our data in terms of, like, we want to reach consumers who want to take action. We look for purpose seekers. We find a way to cut the data so that we are finding the platforms where we can reach this type of consumer. And then in addition to just the platforms, it's really the targeting within those platforms.
Got it. Thank you. Something I want to sort of move ahead to, because I know this is going to have a lot of good questions. You mentioned launching brands from start to finish and everything in the middle, and you launched a new hair care brand in the middle of COVID, which has to be an immense challenge within itself. Can you walk us through sort of how you went from ideation to actual products on the shelves this year, and what were the successful platforms in order to, reach consumers and have them, buy a new product in the middle of a pandemic?
Yep. So I led the creation. Let me move this Q&A section down. Lots of great questions. I led the launch of a range of products from Dove called Amplified Textures. So again, selfishly, as a Black woman with natural curly textured hair and a number of friends in the same group, I noticed that there was a white space opportunity. We didn't have, while our products, we have shampoos, we have conditioners that can be used with all hair types. I knew that, especially for the Black consumer, they want to make sure that products are created specifically for their hair type in mind, even though maybe our general market conditioner could work just as well. They want to understand that the product was created for them, for their hair texture, with that in mind. And so it was really exciting doing lots of different workshops, trying to get into the consumer mindset, taking myself out of it and really understanding what is it that they're looking for from a product standpoint, and what could Dove do to help close this gap. And I think what was interesting is when we look across all of our categories for Dove, as I mentioned, as a brand, there's a strong affinity with the A community. And we noticed across all of our categories, whether that's body, EOs, everything but hair, over-indexed with the Black consumer. And so that also helped validate that there was a need for more of a tailored solution to help capture the consumer as it relates to Dove hair. And so, like I said, we had a number of different workshops. We had ingredient workshops. We worked with real women, Black female editors, influencers to gain their input. And so I worked on everything from looking at the packaging, coming up with the names and the products of the SKU, what was on the front of pack, the back of pack, and even the commercial shoot. I think the sad thing with COVID was some of the assets and some of our media plan did have to cut. There was a number of media cuts happening across the organization, and I'm sure a number of other brands and organizations saw that same thing happening. But what was interesting was that during COVID, because of salons being closed, we actually found that this consumer was at home experimenting and trying new products more than ever. And so while we unfortunately couldn't have the full media plan that we had initially planned on, we did see an opportunity where consumers were just going in the store and trying new things on their own. And one thing that we launched was this program called Wash Day Live, where we partnered with celebrity stylists and our influencers every week to give new tips and tricks for this consumer to try at home. So whether it was showing how you could cocktail and mix our different products together, or showing a new hairstyle, this is a really cool opportunity for us to engage with our consumer in a new way. So we used Instagram Live and really used this moment. I think we knew that people were at home, they had time, they weren't doing as much, and we knew that this consumer really values the advice of experts and influencers. So again, instead of this coming directly from Dove, we could have put out commercials and kind of things in traditional media. It was leaning on the others say and their credibility to help drive purchase of the Amplified Textures line.
So it definitely seems like in order to, be authentic, there was the rigor in the creation of the product itself, and then also working with your influencer community and Instagram Live. With Instagram Live or anything you've done in the social channels in 2021, has there been a large e-com component to that as well? So in the virtual salon example, are there any opportunities for consumers to learn a new hairstyle or learn about a new product and also purchase as well?
Yep. So we had purchase, and a nice part of another component of this Wash Day Live program was we partner with a number of hairstylists locally across the U.S. As well as there's an app called Swivel Beauty. So basically they have access to a number of different hairstylists. And so what we did was we paid the stylists. We recognized that they weren't making money with salons being closed, and we paid them to have virtual appointments. And then that would be an opportunity. So it would be something just like this if you were my stylist, and we could talk about questions I had at home. And then as part of that, we were driving to e-commerce. They spoke a lot about the Amplified Textures products, and then would drive to e-commerce as a way for the consumer to buy products.
Very interesting. And I am very impressed how the success of the program is given all the changes in media consumption and just human behavior over the last year. Something I want to talk about is the importance of retail partnerships, retail media, and even in store. And when we spoke before, you mentioned that second to TV, in store is still to this day one of the key drivers of brand awareness. So when you're launching a new product, that is key. But then you also mentioned before, and we were able to catch up earlier this week, that the retail space and partnerships are also, it's almost like a 360 partnership. They help you push product, but also drive the purpose and actionist messaging home. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yep. So again, as I mentioned, purpose is really the core of Unilever as a brand, and Dove as well. And so as we look at all of our channels, so whether it's social, whether it's TV, we did realize that TV after TV in store drives number 2 for awareness. And so now we've been looking at what more can we do in store to help bring to life our various purposes. So we have a Dove self-esteem program that we partner with retailers to do in-store displays. The work that we're doing around the Pound Act, we're actually going to have a display at Walmart in June. So pretty big in-store unit, prominent space, and we're going to actually put QR codes on that display to ask consumers to go sign the petition. Again, spread the word on what Dove is doing. But when you think about all the traffic and the captive audience that you have in retail, it really has been a key awareness driver for us, especially because a lot of times those consumers are going there looking for specific Dove products. They're quite familiar. I think it's different when you're looking at social media and people are scrolling, but when you're in that in-store experience, a lot of times people will take that extra time to stop and look and read and look at the messaging.
What is, I guess, from your personal perspective, what does the in-store experience look like moving forward? A lot of states are starting to open up. New York is opening up. I'm very happy about that. What is the in-store experience of the future? Is it the same as it previously was, or is it more of a hybrid, maybe a buy online, pick up in store?
I actually think, but when I think of, so we work with a lot of the mass channels, so the Walmarts, the Walgreens, Target. I think when I think of a retailer who's really getting it right is Target. They're leaning more and more into the beauty and experiential space when it comes to in-store. And I don't think people are shying away from that with COVID and the world opening up. I think these mass retailers are learning from the Sephoras of the world that people who who like beauty and like these products, they want to experience them in store. They want to understand what they're buying and it not just be this sterile environment, but I think more and more experiential and bringing a little bit more of that emotion and beauty in store is going to be critical.
Emotion and beauty. Do you think some is lost if you don't have sort of the tactile or visual experience, like I guess Sephora or not Target is growing in store? So some of the true sort of brand value or positioning is lost if you can't physically be there and sort of touch and experience.
So it's funny because we also talk a lot about the digital shelf and how when we talk about in-store and retailer experience, it needs to evolve beyond not just thinking about how are we going to launch a product in person, but also what is that going to look like digitally, and the two should work together. We spend a lot of time whenever we're launching a new product, we talk about our 7 OA, our 7 omni assets, making sure that the digital shelf, we have strong images of front of pack, back of pack, images explaining how to use the product and what it goes well with. There's a whole strategy that we work on when also launching not only in store, but also from a digital standpoint.
What advice would you have to other marketers, whether it's a legacy brand or an emerging brand and marketing team, to sort of try to replicate and balance what you were just mentioning, sort of the sort of yin and yang to the in-store and online experience? What are the sort of the key things our marketers listening today should take away and remember moving forward?
I think it's a basic one, but I think it's something that we struggle with all the time, but is really being clear on what that single-minded messaging is, and how does that message change depending on the channel. So if there is something that we're doing for TV, what is that message? What do we want consumers to take away? What do we want them to do? What does that look like in store? What does that look like for our influencers? I think that is something we're constantly doing, and trying to think of, consumers aren't going to spend much time. And so making sure that that message is tailored per channel, but still consistent across the overall campaign, I think is something that we constantly are taking a step back and asking ourselves.
So as there's an explosion of new channels in different types, Clubhouse is getting a lot of press these days, rightfully so. Are you evolving your sort of brand mission statement and sort of the idea of purpose continuously so that you could invest in reach consumers in new channels? Because I'm imagining that not in every case does the channel align directly with your overall messaging. Yeah,
and again, like I was saying in the beginning, I think the struggle with purpose messaging is a lot of times when we look at, I mean, I've been having these conversations even yesterday with our media team, as we look to launch some of our new campaigns, we're talking, a lot of the inventory is around 15-second digital video buys, 6-second digital video buys, trying to consolidate a message that might take a minute to really tell the story and tell the power and tell the emotion. How do we get that to translate? And I think that's why some of these channels like a Clubhouse, I'm very, very interested to see what brand, I know brands have already started to do things there, but how do we find more of these avenues to have more conversations? So I think Clubhouse is interesting. We're currently working on a new podcast, a branded podcast with a prominent content creator. How do we look at different ways to get those long form messages out? But Clubhouse is one, and I think probably many have mentioned that today, is one that I'm quite excited to try. I've noticed, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, they just hired 2 people, one on the media side and one on the marketing side. So I think they're starting to build out their team, and I'm really curious to see how they're going to start partnering with brands. But I would love Dove to be on that list, and hoping to pilot a couple ideas in the coming couple of months as well.
I would love to see that. Earlier, I want to go back to something you just mentioned earlier. You talked about the importance of PR, and whether it's your purpose-driven marketing, your overall brand voice, the best way to get that across to your consumers is through longer form content. but not all of the media channels that consumers are spending all their time on today allow for that, which you just mentioned. So are you using channels like the Snapchats of the world or other social channels as like almost a trailer or teaser to then direct them to maybe a site or other property where you have all that long form content?
It's funny you say that, because we have a partnership and some exciting work coming out soon. I can't give it all away, but basically we're partnering with a music label actually to create a music video. So it's an iconic song that's been out for some time, but the song came out before the time of music videos. And so it's funny when you said the trailer idea, because that's actually how they launched. That's part of their launch plan, is kind of launching a shorter form mini trailer and then teasing people before the long form comes out. So we'll actually be taking that strategy that is typically seen in the music industry and maybe for TV shows and movies, and we're going to be applying that to Dove. But yes, we've used Snapchat, we've used some of the smaller form, and I think the nice thing about those channels, like the TikToks and the Snapchats, is the younger audiences are very, very action oriented. They're more diverse than ever. They care more than any of the other cohorts about these different diversity initiatives. And I even read, if you looked at TikTok users were more likely to join in a Black Lives Matter protest than anyone else. So I think when you think about who is on these different channels, we do notice that they very much are in line with what Dove as a brand stands for. So those actionists, those who want to take charge, make change, we're really seeing that from the Gen Z and the younger consumer, which has been great about engaging some of the other newer channels.
So I'm glad you mentioned that about the TikTok audience. So when you're communicating with them and developing and building enthusiasm and passion for things like Black Lives Matter, is that conversation siloed within only TikTok, or are you able to bring them to some other channels, maybe some of your own content or own properties as well, or is it a lot of different siloed conversations?
And to be completely honest, I think TikTok is a channel that we're just starting to dip our toes in. So we're even behind there. And last year when we launched, we had a response to what was happening with the Black Lives Matter protest and George Floyd. We had a whole campaign called America the Beautiful. And the idea was that America won't be beautiful until it's beautiful for everyone. But we made sure that we tapped our influencers for that campaign. We did TV, we did, it was very much a 360 campaign versus just siloing and focusing on one channel. And that's typically our approach, is making sure that we're really surrounding our consumer across a number of different earned and owned channels.
I like that concept of sort of surrounding the consumer and having a lot of sort of parallel or different conversations that are tailored to each sort of media channel that you're working with. We only have about 5-7 minutes left. So if any listeners have any other questions, please input them to the Q&A function. But something I wanted to sort of ask you about, or in sort of, what is the biggest change that you found or most effective new media or channel to drive action from this actionist audience? You mentioned TikTok, but is the overall behavioral shifts you've seen around social justice issues, or even during COVID shopping, is that going to be consistent from here on moving forward? Or is that something your brand purpose is to keep that passion going, if that makes any sense? Mm-hmm. Is that something you guys have to work to keep momentum on, or do you see the momentum here to stay?
I hope the momentum is here to stay. I think everything from the Stop Asian Hate conversations to what was happening during the last year with the Black Lives Matter protests, I think it's been nice, because I think we are having significantly more conversations internally. It's unfortunate that, and not just internally, not just at work, but amongst peers across companies, I think it's allowed for a lot more conversation. And I think the nice thing when we even think about emerging media is some of it's taking the media that we've always had, but consumers, what I noticed last year were consumers were taking a stronger stance. There was a campaign, I think it was called Pull Up or Shut Up. And it was a whole Instagram page where this woman was basically asking companies, show us how diverse your boards are, show us how diverse your leadership is. So taking channels that have kind of existed for a long time, but really putting pressure on different companies to be transparent. And I think that to me what is what's been the most exciting is how these different channels have really allowed consumers to participate with brands and corporations in ways that we haven't ever before. And they're really holding us accountable. And there are times when we're called out, and I actually love it because sometimes there's things that I've thought about or things that I haven't known, it's been hard to articulate, but I think it's great when consumers are using these channels, not just for us to advertise to them on those channels, but also hold us accountable, push us to do more, and kind of call us out on making sure that we continue to walk the walk.
Yeah, I'm noticing a lot more of that. You're seeing that today with all the legislative action in Georgia. A lot more CEOs and brand leaders are having a voice, which is great to see. But it also seems that sort of brand messaging now is beyond sort of the product value, beyond sort of the parallel benefits of Dove hair. It's now to sort of your core as an organization. So it's definitely interesting to see that evolution. So as we sort of begin to wrap up, take things back to sort of a more personal level, has there been a sort of major shifts for yourself in terms of how you're shopping, your media consumption, and are you applying any of what you're experiencing yourself to your job and your brand building activities?
This is probably like the worst time for me to be on a panel like this because I've been trying over the last month. So I've been working in the Caribbean. I'm trying to take advantage of this work from home, work from anywhere life. So I've actually been working in the Caribbean for since end of February. And I've been trying to disconnect a bit from media. So I haven't been on Instagram, haven't been going on as much. So I'm probably not the best person to be asking right now. I've been trying to disconnect and really, really focus on those in-person, whether it's in person or speaking on the phone or reconnecting more. Because I think because of COVID and being at home more, it's just been very easy to get caught up on your phone. And I've been trying to monitor my cell phone usage and digital usage. So I'm almost reverting a bit at the moment. It's trying to, which makes it harder for work. I'm like, I don't think I'll be able to continue this that much longer. But I was doing a bit of a month-and-a-half cleanse just to really, really focus. And I'm enjoying it. But I think being on the different social channels is where I do find a lot of inspiration for work, where I get ideas. I see what other brands are doing. I might read about it, but I feel like I almost am seeing what people are talking about more when I'm fully engaged in those channels. And I think Clubhouse is one in particular that I'm really curious to see how it evolves. I'm noticing that a lot of other platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn are trying to find a way to hop on that trend. And we've seen that before, where other brands took what Snapchat was doing and incorporated that into their platform. And so Clubhouse, that's one that I'm excited to see who's going to win that battle. Is Clubhouse going to be here to stay, or is Instagram or something else going to kind of take over what they're trying to do?
It's interesting you mentioned sort of cleansing electronically. Us and everyone listening, we spend all day on a screen. We're on a Zoom, on our email, presentations, and to TV. And if you look on LinkedIn, a lot of people post about taking breaks from media consumption. And as it seems like it's, fairly popular, or a lot of people are doing it, how are you still able, as of putting your marketer hat back on, communicate and make sure people are still aware of what you're doing, whether it's new product releases or your purpose-driven efforts? Is that where we're leaning into PR the most, so that regardless of what media people are consuming, they understand what you're doing?
I mean, I think for us, success is obviously we can have a great media campaign, we can work with influencers, but I think the best work is when we create something and editors want to write about it, people want to share it. I mean, Nike had a great new maternity campaign that came out the other week, and I didn't even see that online. I read it somewhere, and then so I shared it with someone else, and someone else shared. And I think when people genuinely want to share the work that you're doing, I think that's really when the magic is happening. I think that's, and even with products, I think when it's a great product, people are they're gonna share with their friends and share with their community.
We have one more question come in, but I see Marty, so I think we're at time.
I always feel bad, like I come on and I'm like the guy on stage going, come on.
I think I know. I think when people see you're at sort of the end, they're like, "Oh no, I have to get this question in now." But unfortunately, we don't have time for that.
Of course. Well, Aaron, Adam, thanks so much for a great session. I really enjoyed it. Aaron, thanks so much for sharing about the 4 pillars at Dove. I thought that was really interesting in terms of how you're approaching that. I was going to make a wisecrack about the anti-hair discrimination, but I'm sure you really experience it more so than me, other than the follically challenged. But listen, it was really a pleasure to have you both. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and really appreciated you sharing everything, Aaron. And great questions.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So before we welcome our next speaker, a quick reminder to submit your questions via the Q&A widget. We leave time at the end of every session, as Adam kind of alluded to right there, to answer those questions. Up next, we're joined by Marissa Kukaru, the head of global media at Bose, and the session will be moderated by the world famous and old friend of mine, Christopher Young, who is the industry manager of East Coast for Walmart Connect. Welcome to the stage, Marissa and Christopher.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. No problem. Thanks so much. Looking forward to a great session.
You good, Marty? All right. Hey, Marissa, how are you?
I'm good, Chris, buddy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Well, thank you for having us here today. I'll try to make it less about me or about my kids who may inevitably knock down the door behind me in some sort of sick April Fool's prank. But thanks for having us here, and welcome, Marissa. I know Aaron and Adam just sort of kicked it off in touching upon the pandemic, and we'll just kind of go from there about changing behaviors. So first and foremost, I mean, the pandemic has changed the way that we live, right? And ultimately the way that we shop over the past year. So what are some of the changes or shifts that you've undergone during this time as an org?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, everybody, I'm sure all organizations have done the whole work from home. We've been home for over a year. Don't know when we're going back. Before the pandemic, we had already made the announcement, just in terms of following consumer behavior, that we were going to close our retail stores. And that was just, again, to follow consumer behavior, that more and more people were shopping online. So either through our direct e-com and then through our resellers, both reseller e-com and reseller brick and mortar. So we were a little bit ahead of the game, not on purpose by any means, but we were a little ahead of the game. I would say when we look at the pandemic and how that affected things, it's not so much about how it changed how we were working, but really emphasize the importance of having contingency plans and emphasize the importance of being very nimble and able to pivot, because there were countless plans that we had to adjust, throw out, completely rebuild. So as we got towards the latter half of the year, we got really good at having backup plans on top of backup plans to make sure that we were covered. And we ended up having to use a few of them. So it was a really good thing to just be flexible.
That's great to hear. And as I had mentioned to you in prep for this, my last in-person meeting was up at Bose in Massachusetts. So serendipitous that we're here, hopefully as we are coming out of this, but really, really interested in the way that Bose really speaks to the customers, right? So what does customer centricity mean for Bose? And as you talked about that changing behavior, how have your media strategies, possibly adjusted to remove friction, during the research or shopper journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So from a customer centricity standpoint, everything that we do is trying to keep the customer at the core. It's by no means is there a one size fits all for the customers. There are so many different segments, there are sub-segments. So we try really hard to keep the customer at the core, but understand all those different groups and who we want to talk to, how we want to talk to them, understand what their passions are, how they engage with content. All those things come together and really inform and impact our creative, our strategic approach, where and how we want to talk to them. From looking at how we can reduce friction across the journey, I would say, in full transparency, it's definitely a work in progress. Rome was not built overnight. So we're trying to make and become stronger here. I think we've made some really big strides in helping make sure that the customer journey is more seamless. For me, I just want to make it easy for the customer. I want them to be able to, be aware of our brand and engage with the brand, and then follow through all the way down to conversion wherever their preference is in the most simplistic manner. So some of the things that we've looked at have been bringing that shopping experience more to the forefront, making a lot of our social more shoppable. This past year was the first time we ever really specifically drove to some of our reseller partners like Walmart, like Amazon, and others, so that we were showcasing that easy step. If your preference is to shop at Walmart, here you go, we're one click away. So from that perspective, I would just say, just make it simple, make it easy. They don't want barriers, especially in today's world where there's really a lot less patience. We need to make it easy.
Yeah, fewer clicks, right? Let them shop where they want to shop and ultimately buy how they want to buy, right? And we're encountering a lot of that at Walmart and many other retailers too. And we've all been forced to pivot. You talked about social there as being one area of bringing sort of Bose to the forefront. What other maybe experiences or platforms are you trying or investing in to enhance that customer experience?
Yeah, for sure. Social is definitely a big one, and exploring some of the newer social platforms as well. So we've gone deeper than I probably originally thought we would have in TikTok this past year. We're starting to explore Clubhouse a bit because as an audio platform and as an audio brand, there's a nice synergy there. Some of the other areas, audio is a big one. Audio has been, it's interesting, right? Because audio is more of that laid back environment, podcast in particular, but from a brand perspective, and all the research will show you that consumers love podcasts. Like they trust podcast hosts like they trust their best friends. So it is so funny to me, and I get it. I love podcasts too. So, we're continuing to explore audio and seeing how we can make that work for us. Lots of different ways of diving into really just how we can have more creative content speaking to our audiences in a way where they're most engaged. So, those are the big ones. It's funny, we still have some traditional channels that work really well for the brand too. Like traditional linear TV works well. So it's a balancing act of which audience segment we're going after, what our communication message is, and making sure we have the right mix.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? Like gotta fish where the fish are. And clearly as an audio company, audio makes a ton of sense there. Really seeking out where those fish are, right? So I think what's interesting is, the life cycle of your products is quite long, right? So the purchase funnel is a little bit longer. It would be a lower velocity. How are you sort of uncovering some of these shoppers? How are you bringing those to new customers? And maybe talk a little bit about the targeting, addressability that you're sort of working with, and maybe a little bit about the cohorts that you're leveraging that we spoke about in the past.
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's something that we always are continuing to evolve on. So, historically, we've looked at just audio enthusiasts and folks who are big in consumer electronics. And now we're starting to branch off a little bit more and look at a number of segments. And for that, it's, who is already very aware, very inclined to consider Bose. Others are who are aware of us, but don't really consider. And then there is a group, it's right now, it's a younger audience that isn't as aware of the brand. So talking to each of those groups and then creating subsets of those, because those are still very large audiences, right? Sure. I mean, if you are targeting an audience that's super large, you can't say anything that's going to really resonate with them. So what we're trying to do is find subsets of those audiences, like I mentioned to you, as like cohorts that we're calling them, and understand how can we group them in a way that we can tap into passions and tap into what they really care about and show up in ways that they're going to engage with, that they're going to care about. So we're taking it from, the 30,000 foot view down to more of like a 5,000 foot view to help us just be more relevant. And it's new, it's a newer approach that we're testing into, but I'm super excited about it because I think that it just makes sense.
Totally. I think, as we're bringing those to new audiences, one thing I was interested in is how do you really expand the assortment, right? Loyalty has been at the top of the list of many retailers, many brands, but how do you keep somebody within that Bose ecosystem, if you will, and really drive attachment?
That is an awesome question. And I would say that it really comes down to the brand and the products and also customer service. So for us, we are really, really focused on bringing the best audio that we can, the most quality, and our customer service is awesome. So it's those, harder areas that are harder it's not a marketing world. It's not a marketing issue. It's more of like making sure that we're bringing really, really quality and strong elements to a customer and being reliable. I would say, on the flip side, on the marketing side, again, tapping into those passions is key. So partnering with, influencers or groups or whoever that people and consumers are passionate about will keep them coming and keep them interested in the overall brand. But really, from a loyalty perspective, a lot of it is built at the brand level. You can do some things in terms of also having like ongoing conversations, making it really super simple to provide additional value to the customer. But it's an ongoing project.
No, I don't think there's a perfect answer for that, but I think you did a great job. And I think there's some out there that are doing it well, but nobody perfectly yet at this point, right? So one thing that always comes up is, performance and measurement, right? So even with, CRM, targeting the right people, bring them in, how does Bose look at measurement? And maybe a little bit of what's been working well for you.
Yeah. So we measure pretty much everything we can. We're a company built by engineers. Data is extremely important. And for any company, you need to know how anything that you're investing in is going to perform. We've had, as I mentioned, we've had strong success with social. We've had success with TV, with personalized media. I think that CRM, you bring up CRM, that's definitely interesting and extremely at the forefront right now as we're looking at potentially, or we are going to a cookieless world soon. So for us right now, it's understanding what's working now, but you also have to be flexible to understand what's going to work in the future because the measurement is going to change.
Yeah, so that is a great topic right there, right? So a cookieless world, what does that even look like? And how is Bose preparing for that?
Yeah, it's a very hot topic right now. I think I've had like 3 conversations on it this week alone. We're looking at ways right now and identifying ways that we can test so we can be better prepared because it's happening. And we don't want to be all of a sudden caught where we don't know what to do. So I think there are a lot of things that we're exploring and seeing how can we be more reliant on our first party data? How can we be more reliant on our partners' first party data? And also like really digging into contextual alignments and seeing how that works. So we'll be testing a few of those things over the next few months to see. But it's going to be interesting. And I think for sure from a data perspective, this is a big one that we were talking about, is we're going to have totally new metrics. I think that's inevitable. And that's why it's so important to test now, because you don't want to all of a sudden have to have new metrics and no idea whether or not that's really working.
No, that's true. We all need to evolve, and the measurement that we've used in the past, whether it be MMM, MTA, right? We talked about that a little bit. Some may not be possible, right? Like there's going to be gaps in information. So really appreciate that there. You talked about social, you talked about some of the experiences that you've been leveraging. What emerging channels do you think are most exciting? And where would you sort of metaphorically want to crack the nut on? How can we leverage this, or where do you see a big unlock for Bose in the future?
Yeah. So I know I mentioned audio, and I do think that especially like the audio space, podcast space, they've come a long way, but I think that there's still places to go in terms of better targeting, better measurement. There are more and more storytelling podcasts that are emerging that are like sitcom-like shows. So I'm excited to see how those perform and how just that space continues to evolve. That one's super interesting to me. I think this is an extension of social, but influencers and content creators are definitely here to stay, in my opinion. They can speak to their audiences in such an authentic and unique way, and they're super reliable. They're like the podcast hosts in that everything that they say, people take really as like their friend's recommendation. It's present day digital word of mouth, which is extremely powerful. I think the e-com space actually, in your world, is very interesting. The amount that has had to pivot and shift in the last year was incredible. And it's really forcing brands to have a much more holistic, omni-channel approach in how they're showing up across the partner sites. So I think there's a really strong opportunity and need for brands to be able to create a seamless experience from their owned channels to the partner channels. And I think that, the e-com world is just super interesting to me right now.
Yeah, I don't know if we can dig into that just a little bit, right? So resellers, right? You talked at the beginning of this that coincidentally, you were a little ahead of the curve, and you started to shut down your brick and mortar locations. Being the fact that a lot of your products are very complex and are on the cutting edge of innovation, how do you bridge the gap of that unassisted sale, right? Especially in e-commerce where you're not able to physically try the product.
Mm-hmm. That is a really good question. So as a few things, while complex and they are complex and they do have a lot of features, they're also products that most people, for the most part, most people are pretty familiar with. Headphones and speakers, people understand how those work. So it's more about bringing forth content across our partner channels that help bring it to life. So that's one area. For our other products that are a little bit more complex, like frames, for instance, Bose frames are sunglasses that have speakers in the frame, and they're awesome for anybody who hasn't tried them.
I can vouch for that. They're pretty awesome.
That is definitely more challenging. So one of the things that we've been testing and trying is virtual try-on. We've done it through social channels, we've done it through our site. We're starting to explore doing that with partner sites so that people can see how they look on their face through a virtual try-on, which I think has been beneficial. Also, ratings and reviews are so important, and having a strategy that helps, we are very focused on ensuring that we have strong ratings and reviews, and we take the ratings really seriously. So if we're seeing that we're getting dinged in certain areas, we will absolutely do what we can to fix those issues so that that's showing up, because particularly on reseller sites where people can compare other products, it's a huge factor.
For sure. And shameless plug, I know we've got a partnership with Echo, right? So try and buy is definitely at the forefront, right? We know that stores traffic is constant, but we are seeing a shift into the e-commerce world. So we want to make sure that people have those resources and content to experience the product in the same way they would as sort of picking it up, trying it on.
Right.
I have a couple of questions coming in here. Getting back to social, definitely a hot topic here. What have you tried, and could you elaborate on really the partnerships or any future plans that you may have or you're thinking about with Clubhouse and TikTok?
So we haven't tried anything with Clubhouse yet. We're more learning about Clubhouse now and seeing. I know that they just recently launched some of their, it's very high level, some of the brand integrations. So we're starting to see how we can play there. But to me, it just makes a lot of sense because they're an audio platform. We're an audio company. I think that there's some nice synergies. So more to come on Clubhouse. On TikTok, we've done, we've done some hashtag challenges, which were super fun, and they far exceeded expectations. So I think those are, it's one of those things where you never know how things will evolve. I'm sure that they're going to start to see what else can be done because people quickly say, that's old news. I don't want to do it as much anymore, I'm sure. But it has worked really well for us so far. And then just also having presence across TikTok, using our influencers within TikTok has been strong. So, and also TikTok is just so much fun from a consumer standpoint. Like you can get lost in that app for hours. So I just think TikTok's really fun right now, and it's not just for like Gen Z. In terms of like some of the other platforms, we continue to test and look at different opportunities, different exposures. They're just so great for full funnel activations. Facebook and Instagram alone are so great and we see such success across all areas of the funnel.
No, that's great. I appreciate that feedback. Another one I know when looking at Gen Z, millennials, really pretty much every single demographic that you're talking about is gaming, right? Gaming, the interest has been growing, I would say, in every single age group. What have you sort of looked into there? Have you leveraged anything? Where does sort of esports maybe fit into your future marketing plans?
Yeah, so about a year ago, we launched a gaming headset. It was very well received, and it was our first sort of foray into the gaming world. We have a partnership with League of Legends. So we are definitely getting more integrated into the gaming space. Gaming is, I believe, the second most popular sport in the world now. So everybody, whether you are or are not paying attention to it yet, you should be paying attention to it. Like it also shocks me how much it does, to your point, transcend different demographics, different generations. There are lots and lots of gamers. And so to me, again, it's looking at how can we integrate into the passion there and showcase the passion and how we could provide value for that game. It's also so inclusive. You know, gaming, you don't have to be, I mean, to be a professional gamer, you have to be really, really, really good. But you can also just be a casual gamer and want great products. So there's so many different ways that you can look into integrating into games, just being present. Twitch is blowing up. So yeah, if you're not paying attention there, start grabbing some of the gamers.
Helpful marketing tip from Marissa. So please take notes there. Getting back to customer centric, and sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit here with some of the questions here. Reaching customers where they want to shop, right? Intercepting them in more entertainment or the platforms that they're leveraging. You know, what is the big pivot that maybe you've made over the last year, 18 months? And could you elaborate on that? Like, have there been any major shifts from what you were doing, as you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I would say the biggest shift has been being more open to driving to partners. So it's, we actually partnered with a company called Micmac. It's, you know, it helps bring e-retail to the forefront wherever, anywhere on digital. And it gave the consumer the opportunity to purchase wherever they want at their preferred reseller location. So, or directly with Bose.com. So that was new for us, for sure. I think we're going to continue to look into those types of opportunities and see ways that we can just keep it super simple for the customer. You know, it seems like basic, but it was definitely a new venture for us.
I appreciate that, and apologize. I'm trying to make sure you can hear me here. Mike Snafu. So, you know, in looking to those retailers, you've done some interesting things with shoppable content and events, virtual events, shopping events, things like that. I'm not going to mention any retailers. Might not be privy to me. But could you elaborate on that, the success, maybe the interest to do such things in the future? Because these aren't new, right? Like they're almost a mix of entertainment, shopping, and really a number of other things. So have you seen the success there? Is it something that you'll look to do in the future?
Yeah. So China was blowing up in terms of virtual shopping experiences. They launched virtual shopping before the pandemic, but then it really, really took off when the pandemic hit. And quickly, the US started catching on and bringing those to the forefront. So we did try a couple of virtual shopping experiences. One of the most important things, especially in consumer electronics, when you're trying new products or you're testing things, is that wow factor. You don't understand exactly how that headphone really blocks out the noise without trying it, or how you can hear the sunglasses without trying them. So you miss that digital, or you miss that wow experience. We tried to bring the digital wow to the forefront using live shopping. And that was with a partner, as well as we were able to bring our influencer partners in as well. So it was engaging, you got to see it, you got to hear about it, and then you could shop right from the experience too. So I think more of those are to come. It's still early days. So I would say for sure there's not tons of people viewing live, but they also live after the fact, and you can go back and view it in an environment that again is super clickable and you can purchase right from it. So those are interesting to me, and I think that the whole way of shopping has changed, not all for bad either, right? I think that there's like a lot of really strong benefits that have come out of the learnings we've had through the pandemic.
For sure. And those events, I mean, they're fun, right? You bring in some audio acts and it becomes entertainment, as I said, in itself. What could maybe publishers, digital platforms be doing better? Is there anything that you would love to see happen in the future as we move towards a cookieless world? We move towards omni-channel solutions, really just open it up a little bit here.
I'd love more data, which I know is a controversial thing, but I would love more data to understand, better about your audience, better about how, specific to us, not asking for proprietary competitor data or anything like that, but more just about our own customers who are converting or who aren't converting. That's super important too. It's like, who is putting us in the basket or looking at us and not making the next step. So I think a huge one would be more data. I would say I also have this like crazy idea for retail that is I think people miss, or maybe it's just me. It could just be me. I miss, for instance, like, I have 3 little kids, and whenever I have to shop for toys for them, for instance, noise
canceling headphones when you do that.
Yeah, that is needed too.
Right.
But I miss the true walking through the aisles. And I get that there's in a sense that aisle experience through search and through filters and whatnot, but I actually miss like the unknown discovery of products through that aisle walking experience. So I'm like, can somebody please make a virtual aisle that we could walk through and play with? I would love that. It's kind of crazy, but
yeah, it brings up some interesting topics, right? So that is something that when you go into a sterile shopping environment, right, in some cases, whether it be e-com or other, that if you're not exposed to other brands or products or essentially cross-category marketing, you may miss out on a lot. Mm-hmm. So through some of the data that you have received, is there any synergies or sort of nuggets of information that, not proprietary, of course, but that could be maybe interesting, to the audience, what you've seen and maybe some sort of like, hey, we didn't think about that, but that was very useful in our media planning?
That's a great question. I would say probably we've learned more about our audience in the last year than probably in many prior years. I would say for certain audiences, we thought we had hypotheses of where we thought we were, and we're pleasantly proven wrong, which I think is great. But nothing that comes to mind that is not proprietary, unfortunately.
Okay. So I think one crazy thing is new customer acquisition, right? Like you've been talking about content in different areas, bringing new people into the funnel, right? I think there's limits to some data that we may have, but that is sort of how we grow our business, right? Like it's referrals, things like that. You talked about influencers, really a lot coming together there. Do you see influencers being sort of the new level for that? Is social driving new customer acquisition, SEM? What sort of platforms would you say does that the best these days?
Platforms that bring in new customers are probably, it's less platforms and more targeting.
Okay.
It's all about, to me, it's identifying the audiences that we aren't as strong with and really starting to customize content to speak to them. And that could be across whatever touch point or whatever platform they spend a good deal of time with. So I would say less platforms for sure, and more identifying the audiences. We've been predominantly a little bit older, and now we're really starting to go after the younger audiences, and that changes things a little bit, in some ways more significantly than others. But really honing in and creating content that speaks to a younger audience versus like our standard messaging.
Okay. Another question coming in here. Would you bucket publishers as part of your influencer bucket, since they are influential to audiences as well on a higher scale at times? Or is that categorized differently for Bose, right? Or how do you pick and choose between the two tactics?
That's a great question. So in my mind, in my eyes, I look at influencers as true social influencers and personas, but then we need publisher partners to be able to really put a lot of weight behind content. So, or help us co-create content with influencers. We've done that a lot, actually. This past year, we created content with a publishing partner and one of our influencers. We did it last year as well. Those seem to work really well when we pull all parties together. It's sort of like a trifecta.
It's great to know. And you talked about data and measurement, right? Like, what type of KPIs would you be working towards with a content message? Is it a consumption basis? Are we getting to more of the old school models of reach frequency and tuning in, or are you getting conversion metrics in some ways?
First and foremost, engagement and how much people are actually engaging with the content, sharing it, liking it, etc. Then we will look at, so we always have one primary metric and then usually a couple of secondary metrics. So for content, it's usually primary is engagement and secondary would be things like, how much are we driving? How are we driving like qualified visitors to the content or to the site? Things like that.
Okay. So I know we are getting close to time here. Surprisingly, it's been fun. But there's a lot more to talk about, right? So I would just sort of say, what is next for Bose? Like, what are some of those maybe contingency plans that you had thought about, whether it be your virtual mall that you spoke about there, or what is something that you're excited about that you want to try or maybe you haven't done yet? Where do you see everything going?
It's a great question. I would say, we have a lot of exciting things on the horizon. We're in a big year of testing and better understanding those audiences, what content drives, how to convert a lot of new first-time customers to the brand. So we're doing a lot of learning agendas and creating ways that we can better set us up for the future. The cookieless thing is another one. So for us, it's going to be a big learning year. And I think that is exciting in and of itself because it better sets us up for strategic decisions for the future.
That's great. And actually sort of setting the foundation for any successful campaign, right? Like, what are we looking to learn here, or successful partnership, if you will, right? And if you have those KPIs, sort of those key takeaways, those insights that you're trying to find out, then you know what you're getting into up front. You talked about data again, and first-party data targeting. How much are you leveraging your own first-party data when working with 3P vendor, publisher, retailer, et cetera?
Yeah, we definitely use our first party data for sure. We're looking at new ways to use the first party data, and it is with third party, with publishers, as well as programmatically, where we do a mixture. It's a lot of first party and third party, and then primarily for the first party, it's also creating a lot of lookalikes. So being able to branch out beyond just our known customers to those who would be most likely to convert.
And what would you say is more important? Is it the conversion or is it brand? Where are you looking today, or is it a mix?
That is such a good question. That is tricky because
I don't know. Have we spoken about that before?
You need both. I don't think we did. You need both for sure. I mean, brand is so important. It's what will get people to remember you when they are in market. It's what they want to align with. They want to understand what your brand stands for, and what you're going to bring forth to the greater good. But at the end of the day, we're a business too, and we need to drive sales. So they're both extremely important. I think that you have to strike the right balance, and I think that there's a for sure need for both pretty much at almost all times.
That's a great answer. And I see Marty joining us now. Well, you've built a tremendous brand. This was a lot of fun today. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And thanks to Brand Innovators for having us. And welcome back, Marty.
Thank you so much, Chris. Marissa, by the way, did I do a good job with your last name?
You did. Thank you.
Okay. I practiced it many times last night and this morning too. And Chris, I'm glad to see that your bed is made. It looks like I could bounce a quarter off that, man.
I get a lot of compliments on that, but I gotta hand it to my wife for really teaching me how to do it. If you want,
got to fold those corners in. Marissa, thanks so much. Listen, and Chris too. I mean, great questions and thoughtful questions and thoughtful answers, Marissa. I think what you touched on so many different areas from Clubhouse, which has now come up, I think, the fourth time during this session, which I've checked out a number of times. It's I'm still trying to figure it out both myself. Like I feel like creeping sometime when I'm joining a session, and then you also don't want to get called out on like being in. And I've had people invite me to things. It's interesting, but I also find that you can go down a rabbit hole on it and like just get stuck there for a while, and you're just like listening and checking things out. There's so many different channels and topics. So, but I love to hear what you said about testing in a cookieless future. Obviously at Quantcast, that's an important factor for us. We have a tremendous amount of first party data, but have now also created a next generation platform, without cookies. And so it just is, it's a big challenge. I think the thing that resonated most with me is the metrics and figuring out what that means. Personally, I don't think it's going to change dramatically, because at the end of the day, it's still going to be, as you said, Marissa, you still got to drive revenue, right? You're still a brand. You've got a e-commerce site. You've got to drive business one way or the other. I think it's just figuring out what's that best methodology to do that in this new world. But,
yeah, absolutely.
But listen, we're in digital media. It's an ever-changing world, right?
Yes.
If there's anything that's constant, it's changing.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, great. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciated you having us. We have one last session left in today's programming, and I am excited to welcome Sue Seam, who is the Senior Director of Experience Planning at the Kellogg Company. This session will be moderated by Jason Kaplan. Jason is the Vice President of CPG at Vlasis. So without further ado, let's welcome to the stage Sue and Jason for our last session of the day.
All right. Thanks, Marty.
No pressure.
Yeah, thanks, Marty.
No pressure at all. That last one was good.
I know.
So I'll kick this off just to introduce myself. Like Marty said, my name is Jason Kaplan. I am the Vice President of our CPG team here at Vlasis. And for a long number of years, we've had a close partnership with Kellogg's. And so I'm excited to have Sue join us today. And she's really the brains behind the operation. So I will kick things off and let her give a quick intro. Sue, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about the details of your role and what you do at Kellogg's?
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me. Look forward to the discussion today. So, yeah, Sue Seams. I lead all experience planning for Kellogg's North America. I've been at Kellogg's for almost going on 4 years now. So basically, everyone's always like, well, "What's experience planning?" It's always, I have to do the big explanation, but it's basically I oversee a team working with over 20 of our brands on bringing that true consumer experience to market, to our consumers. So that I oversee with media, influencer, content, commerce, brand shopper, coupons. So we bring to life those experiences for our brands, but also from a promotion lens. So if we're doing it through a passion point, such as gaming or such as maybe Cheez-It Bowl, how do some of our brands fit within those? But again, bringing that experience to life. So a bit about me.
Sounds good. So you're going to have some good perspective, and kind of just to set up the way that you and I have spoken and the way that we're going to approach today's session. I know it's probably cliche, and it goes without saying to say that the last 12 to 14 months have been complete upheaval in our personal lives and our professional lives. But most importantly for this conversation today, the shift in consumer behavior, the shift in consumer dynamics that has happened, or at least been expedited because of COVID, has really taken everyone aback. And we've all had to plan and replan and shift the ways that we communicate with consumers. So that's kind of the lens that I want to think about as we talk today. From my perspective and the purview that I have as I manage our sales team and interacting with a wide variety of CPG clients on digital and print both, we saw a lot of trends last year. As the pandemic hit, there was this really quick shift in consumer behavior where e-com obviously grew, and we all knew that was going to happen, but the quick adoption of buying online and picking up at store, or the fact that certain brands were sold out for months and people became category shoppers as opposed to brand shoppers. With all of that as the lens of what changed, let's first talk broadly in general over the last 12 months. How has Kellogg's kind of navigated this?
Yeah. I mean, overall, I do have to say, it's been, I'm very lucky to be maybe in the CPG space during this, 2020 time period that we had. Again, I think from a corporate perspective, Kellogg's did an amazing job with keeping, employees safe, keeping, all employees at the forefront, all the way through to supply chain. So we were, very successful in that. I think the one thing we were obviously not prepared for was the incremental demand, right? I mean, there was just a substantial, demand for our products, which was great. People were actually coming back to cereal. We actually saw a decline over the past few years, and now people being home, coming back to cereal, which is a big, portion of our portfolio. And so we're thinking about it through the lens of new occasions, right? So people are deciding to eat cereal for dinner or for a snack, and obviously have that extra time in the morning to eat it as well. So I think we're really trying to, as we think about behavior change, how do we continue to retain those consumers to our portfolio? So from a business perspective, that has been strong, and we continue. We had ongoing kind of webinars and things for our marketing organization to really be on the pulse of what's changing from a consumer behavior, because that's how we base all our consumer experiences and our plans on. So I think, Kellogg's a phenomenal area there. And I think we've also really plussed up, we call it our Heart and Soul Initiative. So we were able to donate over $20 million to Feeding America, No Kid Hungry. And we're actually including that in a lot of our plans as well. How do we really continue to give back and really focus on kind of like that brand purpose? So.
Awesome. So that was a really good overview, and I think you guys are the typical case study of how you have to start thinking in this new world.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, it's a new marketplace. It's almost like a new way of talking to consumers.
Yeah.
I know, the biggest challenge that we saw is March was when everything started shutting down.
Yeah.
We didn't know how long this was going to last. Is it going to be April? Personally, I thought we'd be rocking and rolling by Memorial Day. Little did I know it was probably Memorial Day of 2021. But we all had to quickly pivot and replan. I know you guys launched some programs pretty quickly to address the marketplace. What are some specifics of those campaigns and how you guys navigated that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it was funny, I was almost in the same boat as you, Jason. I just thought, having my kids come home with their iPads, I'm like, oh, it's going to be just for a couple of weeks. Who knew, right? As we're still here. And so I think that was one of the, we really kept a pulse on, when I say like consumer behavior and what people were searching for and what were they trying to find on such platforms like Pinterest. And what we found was, when the world stopped, that's what we can call it, right? It stopped in March. Everyone was home, there's no programs, there's no sports. And so we kept finding this trend of parents going out there. What are some educational activities or some crafts or some things that I can do with my kids now that we're all home? And so we definitely saw this trend. And what we did is we kind of did an interesting influencer campaign where you tapped into Trista Sutter, which everyone knows is our favorite America's First Bachelorette. She's a great mom, great mentor. And we had her do some quick segments about how you can leverage Kellogg's products, so products you find in your pantry. We actually called them pantry boredom busters, on how you can entertain your kids. So you can build Pop-Tarts, gingerbread houses. Actually, Eggo happens to be, Eggo, you can leverage that as a canvas. And how do you put fruit and different things on there? Even Cheez-It happens to be a perfect 1 inch by 1 inch square. So it's great for math activities. So we did these segments airing on different news channels across the US, got millions of impressions on it, a lot of engagement. Even more people trying to take those on and like, hey, here's another way that I can leverage some of your products in a new way and entertain my kids. So that was definitely an interesting way. We had another, so that was kind of being proactive on there. And then just your point earlier, I can't even count, or my team count, how many times we had to do a replan, but getting into kind of the back half of the year, again, thinking through the lens of school, not all kids went back to school. And for Rice Krispie treats, that is a huge area of opportunity for us. It's an easy kind of snack to put into kids' lunch boxes and send them on their way. We even had creative packaging with a blue wrapper, and it has a heart where as you send your kids off to school, you could say, hey, good luck today, or I love you. Well, with kids not going back to school, what were we going to do with our, the packaging? What were other ways that we can leverage that packaging in a new way? And we found, again, on Pinterest, as everyone's home and you're back to school, right? So actually kids are on their iPad all day, parents are on their Zoom all day, and just looking for a quick break. How can you get a brain break? And what we decided to do is create an AR experience with a lens that, as you could put your phone in front of the Rice Krispie treat wrapper, actually within that heart, think of like the magic 8-ball back in the day where you could shake it, like what is your fortune? This would be shake it up, and it's like, here's a great idea for a brain break. So brain break, it's hard to say that fast. So could you dance like a jellyfish? Could you give your dad a hug? But it's just, again, a great way to leverage, new tech with our packaging and try to think about a way to attach it to consumer behavior. So
I should have definitely called you during the month.
I got some ideas.
Your role as school principal, right?
Right.
All right. So as I kind of think about, like, that was the first, my gosh moment, right? And we switch quickly, and then we're going to wait and see how things progress as things, as things stayed shut down and we became longer and longer into this period of time.
Yeah.
Commerce naturally grew, right? I mentioned earlier, the shift to buying online, picking up in store, getting things delivered via Instacart. I just saw a report from IRI yesterday. By the end of last year, over 12% of all grocery dollars were being spent on e-com and 35% of non-edible, which is, we all knew it was going to grow, but obviously things got accelerated very quickly last year. Yeah. So in the frame of e-commerce and with our add to cart programs, we saw a massive shift into that. But then there was also things in terms of connected TV and streaming and people being stuck at home. So as it relates specifically to e-com and how you guys focused on that, what are some examples of things that you guys did there that you found to be successful?
Yeah. Great topic. And I have a couple of examples that come to mind here. And we saw triple-digit growth as well. So again, where my kind of focus area is then how do we really shorten that path to purchase? How do we really, when someone discovers one of our brands, how can they quickly add it to cart? And so obviously this makes a huge opportunity for us, specifically within the world of social commerce. So you throw out, some amazing stats, and just social commerce in general is going to grow to 53 billion by the year 2023. That's like right around the corner, and it's double from 2020. So from a social perspective, it just gives that area of triggering that gotta have it moment as you're like flipping through. It provides an opportunity for us to share our new flavors, our new innovations. And so we really took, a leap into the last quarter, and we tapped into a shoppable tech solution called Micmac. I'm sure a lot of other CPGs I know they're already leveraging that as well, but really trying to find out and test and learn within the space about what creative is driving, those people to actually click through, add to cart, which retailers are working best for us. So it's a huge opportunity, and we're continue to test and learn there. And I think the beauty there is, we're getting close to the closed loop. We're getting close to like when people can see something, we know that they've purchased it. And so a lot of learning there. You brought up the idea of like with streaming as well, talk about another consumer behavior that significantly changed. I know we could probably all talk about what's our favorite Netflix show and things like that, but we really tapped into this behavior again. We like to link behavior with occasion. So snacking occasions, huge opportunity for us with Pringles, Cheez-It, all our crackers and PWS brands that we have. And what we did is we partnered with Amazon, and we had this, we called it the Amazon Cheez-It Snapped and Stream reward program, where we actually rewarded consumers for watching 8 hours of specific content a month with a $5 Cheez-It credit you can use on Amazon, and a $5 Prime Video credit. So, we're encouraging that behavior, but what was great for us is that, again, as people are watching that, that content, or they're going to watch content, that they quickly add Cheez-It to their cart, in their Amazon cart. And then, they also, what helped us is that it brought new people to our brand. So it's specifically Cheez-It Snapped, which is still a newer brand for us. It's basically Cheez-It within kind of like a chip form in a bag. So it actually worked out really well for us there.
Yeah, and it's funny, you mentioned, some of these tie-in partnerships and doing something with a Prime Video or
Mm-hmm.
credit, creating value outside of cents off,
Yep.
right? But on that note, if you think about overall consumer promotion during the last year, it kind of saw an uptick because of a lot of factors, right? Unfortunately, there was a lot of layoffs. There was a lot of people unemployed.
Yeah.
Which meant families were more strapped for cash, and couponing and other forms of consumer promotion took root, where it may have been declining year over year for several years, and we saw a little bit more of an uptick. Other types of promotion, like in-store sampling, that's out the door because no one's going in store. So as you think about consumer promotion and this I guess the secondary topic around social causes and what value really is to a consumer, that shifted, right?
Absolutely.
So how did that affect, the way that you approach things last year?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And, again, we still saw, the impact of coupons, but we also saw, just to your point, is that consumers are thinking of value, not just in dollar and cents, but what are they truly getting out of your product? Is it from a health perspective? Is the product giving back to someone else? Is it giving me some value of content? So one of our long-term campaigns that we've had is with Frosted Flakes for Mission Tiger. And we actually kicked this off a couple years ago. And it was all around the focus that we saw that there was a significant decline in investment behind or just taken away middle school sports. And we know just with, Tony the Tiger and making kids feel great and feeling strong, like sports is a huge area of opportunity for us. So we did start with every box of Frosted Flakes, $1 or $2. You scan your receipt and you're able to give that back to this fund to help support middle school sports. We just took that up even a notch last year, knowing even though sports wasn't around, there were other types of activities that we were able to do. And then I think the beauty there is it's a value back to us through our Kellogg, our CRM program, which is called Kellogg Family Rewards, where we're able to get that first party data and then redistribute any additional content and things like that to our consumers. So we're consistently trying to give, back. I think, another another way that we're doing it, and to your point, we don't have that opportunity for in-store sampling. So how do we try to get product to our consumers, and even through the way of reward? And so with one of our brands, Eggo, we recently just launched, is we, again, going back to insight, going back to behavior, and what we're finding, and I don't know if this is true in your household with, I think you have young kids, it's true in mine too, but that parents find that they're 40% less positive about breakfast when it involves their kids. So you think about the morning and the stress, and you got kids involved, it is a high point of stress and pressure. And so we recognize this, and we're like, how can Eggo play like an easy role, creating that harmony, breaking the tension into the morning time period? And so what we did is we created like this tool called the Logometer. And if you think about it, it's really powered by data from Twitter and Google. And we can actually understand through how people are, on social, like, oh my God, I had such a rough morning. And you see the pictures with like the cereal bowl on the floor, or, you could see the trends of this happening. And as we can understand the pressure, if it's low or high, that's how we can give back to the consumer. So if it's a little bit lower, everyone's doing okay, maybe we send back like some humorous content from a media partner of some sort. But if it's high, we're giving away boxes of free Eggos through coupons or whatever else, and people can click through and go take that to the store and hopefully, and enjoy Eggos, and hopefully that releases some tension. So I thought it's an interesting way, and it totally makes sense. Is like one of the highest days of high pressure, because I get this question, was basically when the time changed, daylight savings times, right? You lose an hour, like, oh my gosh, and kids are running around. So that was actually, I think, one of the highest kind of recent pressure days that we had. But
yes, it was terrible.
I know.
I feel like you must have a hidden camera in my house. Is describing our morning routine of like arguing over breakfast as we have 10 minutes to get in the car, get out the door, and get like the carpool going. So kind of building upon the whole idea of what value is to a consumer now, and kind of shifting from the highlight of last year being COVID. The other thing that came forward more last summer was social justice and all the values around that, diversity and inclusion. And that was another really inflection point in the year where brands had to very quickly pivot. I know we paused social influencer campaigns and redid things in a new lens. I know a lot of brands had a lot of angst in terms of how do we address this. And I know a lot of people probably on this call today are still trying to navigate that. So I did want to take the opportunity to ask you, because I feel like Kellogg's has kind of led the way. And I know in working with you guys, it's been something that's been on your mind. So love to give you the forum to kind of educate everyone else, like, kind of your POV on that.
Yeah, it definitely has been an ongoing focus for us. I think, my gosh, we could have a whole other fire chat about that, but I think it's great because Kellogg has been really on the forefront of this. And what I mean by that is we actually started linking all things, and we're now calling it equity, diversity, and inclusion, because we always want equity to come first through the lens of Kellogg's, and we believe everyone has a seat at the table. And so even at the beginning of 2020, we started this big focus of knowing that we have this global perspective of really linking to ED&I. How do we actually embed that into all things marketing? And we set forth a strategy through the lens of talent. So how does that really embed in our training and our recruitment, and who we have working on our brands, to go to market strategy? What are we putting out there in the market? Is it representative of our consumer base? And then kind of our third pillar was about our industry and our partners. Are we tapping into diverse suppliers? Our agency partners, who's working on our business? Is it a diverse talent base? And what are their ED&I principles as well? So again, there's a lot to unpack there. We won't have time, but I think if I just focus on, through the lens of, as I think about, media and how we're approaching that from a marketplace on our go-to-market strategy, is we were an early partner with the ANA on their SIM metric, which for those that aren't aware, that's a cultural insight impact metric. So it basically measures the impact of culture in your creative, and what's that impact to sales. And we found that there's a direct correlation. Those ads that are indexed indexing high on culture, and these are against kind of 8 attributes such as cultural pride or celebration, they're going to score higher. They tend to score higher in sales. We actually link that to NMM. And so now we have this cultural insight metric that we're measuring on the majority of our advertising, making sure that we're truly are resonating and hitting true to those insights in our plans. So that's just kind of like one core element of how we're thinking through that. We've gone through a multitude of different trainings for our full teams, and really launching a whole new portion of within Kellogg's called Cultural Inclusion Marketing. So it's been a great kind of last few months of like really accelerating into this space.
Yeah. It's those things that pop up that you can't ever prepare for, but once you find a solution, it can really help elevate everything in your marketing mix, right?
And it's a long-term play. Like, this isn't something we're addressing it because it is something that it's the right thing to do. But just to that point is we're having, ongoing conversations with our agency partners, and how do we truly think about, the multicultural insight. And so really trying to link this to all our experiences that we're putting out there. Mm-hmm.
So I know we said we only have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned earlier is data and insights kind of leading you down the path to how you're actually going to tactically execute and build your strategies and replan and replan and replan. So, I would ask, if you think about everything that's changed or the way that you're looking forward, are there like 2 or 3 core insights that you've gleaned that's kind of directing you to the future of how you're going to lean into these emerging channels and new media types and things of that nature?
Yeah. As I think about, and I think I've kind of, over the course, we're consistently always thinking about like, what's the evolution of our experiences? And so we know there's big buckets that are out there. We've talked a lot about, the commerce and streaming and social the social commerce piece specifically. I think one of another key areas we're calling it like the home sweet home, right? Even though the world is starting to open up, people might start to come back. There's still going to be more things being done at home. People are cooking more at home. They're enjoying movies at home. Maybe events will always be in a hybrid approach. So we're really trying to think through those experiences and how do we bring more things to home? Is it packing up, different snack boxes and calling it like a concession stand at home? Or is it, what are some different ways that we can think about these new occasions in the home? I think another one that is really big is just when we think about wellness, it's not just about healthy eating or exercising, but it's a kind of a whole component of thinking through, emotional and societal, like having that connection. If you think about Peloton, that's like their whole basis of, health, wellness, but also driving that social connection. So, recently one of a quick example that we did that I love is that with Special K, we wanted to come up with like, what is a new way that we can share all the varieties and all the flavors that we have for Special K? And again, we saw this like one key trend. I don't know if you feel it, but the Blur's Day feeling. It's really like you're living in a day where you're like, is it Tuesday? Is it Wednesday? Not sure what day it is, because it all feels the same. And so again, we saw this trend, and we saw as people were like, well, do people think differently at all on different days about what flavors they like? We didn't think we would find anything, but we learned basically on Mondays, people think there's more conversation around chocolate. And on Tuesdays, there's more conversation about, strawberries. I can't remember exactly what, but there is some kind of trend. And so we thought, wouldn't it be fun to actually align the different flavors we have for Special K with those days of the week to get people out of the Blur's Day kind of feeling. Remember back in the day, maybe you had your PJ day of the week or t-shirt day of the week kind of a thing. And so we kind of released these fun kits that had, a different flavor of Special K every day of the week, along with a matching pair of socks, maybe a weekly planner. So again, just trying to like, as people are really trying to think about wellness and just maybe it's a fun play on that, that was something that we had shared. So always more insights to tap into.
So, something that came to mind as you were talking about that, insights lead to new forms of media, new ways of engaging consumers. I imagine that also could lead to new ways of looking at KPIs and measuring success. What work have you done to try to figure that piece of the puzzle out?
Yeah. we have for like each of our experience plans really kind of clear KPIs, like what is it that we're actually trying to drive, and really trying to link, I know I've talked about this before, but linking to that change in behavior. So if we are truly trying to drive, more sales, we're then going to really try to think about how much more could we think through how we leverage, shoppable partners and things like that. So really the KPIs are truly linked to that experience we're trying to drive. And we have kind of certain pillars within the experience, and that's how we link that all together. So very, very focused on each plan.
Yeah. So we have I think we have about 10 minutes left. We were hoping to get some Q&A. So if you guys have anything that you would like to, I still have a couple more questions for Sue that we can ask, but I would much rather answer any questions of anyone that's on the call with us, so that we're hitting on everything that you're interested in. So the first, there's a lot of questions coming in now. So the first question is, do you research the demographics of different media platforms outside of age, geography, race, religion, nationality? If so, how does it inform the content that is going on each platform?
So, I think what we try to do first is understand, who we really want to go after. And so, if we know that that's what, our brief is, then we're going to look at that audience. So yeah, demos happen to come up first, but again, as we mentioned specifically with ED&I, we're really trying to think about like, what is the right cultural and that content resonance for that target that we're going after. So I think we are trying to take it a layer deeper. Obviously there's always going to be as far as you can go to actually understand the reach, but we are trying to look at what are those right platforms that are actually going to resonate with us. So, yeah.
All right. Another interesting question that I think is perfect for you to answer, because Kellogg's brands run the spectrum. You guys have invested in emerging brands, but then you also have a lot of legacy brands that everyone has known for years. So the question is, how should older brands gracefully enter newer technology spaces such as esports or TikTok or platforms like that?
Yeah, I think it's setting up a learning agenda and like the test and learn, right? So we just, I know we're a little slower to the gate, but we're kind of testing the waters, and we've done some tests and learns with TikTok, and we're making our way there. I think, I'm trying to think of some of the other newer technology. That's really what we have done is like just try smaller tests and learns. What did we really get out of it? What are the things that we want to apply for next round? And, and then maybe make the partnership bigger. So the whole thing is that we really try to encourage our brands is like, that this is not the time to be afraid, where consumer behavior is changing, where things are where there's always an opportunity to learn. So I just say, and that was a big part too with our ED&I piece, is like, oh my gosh, it's this big thing. Where do you start? And it's like, you just have to start somewhere. Is it an insight? Is it just trying to think about pulling in maybe a new type of media partner that's going to really talk to that audience? So I think it's the same way with like kind of new tech and new platforms.
Got it. So then thinking about what I just said, you guys have a big portfolio of products. Again, some emerging brands, some legacy brands. Do you focus, or is it just depending upon the initiative? Do you ever take a portfolio approach versus a brand by brand approach?
Yeah.
And are there any kind of best in class examples that you have of how you take that portfolio approach?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And yes, like I mentioned, we have like brand specific, experience plans, but we also do, through the lens of promotions, more of a portfolio approach. Our largest promotion is by far back to school, where almost every brand in our portfolio plays. And we try to find what is that, key insight for that time period, or what's really going to resonate. So for the past few years, we've had a very successful approach with buy a box, and you get a book. And it was, again, very successful for this time around. And that's for, again, across our portfolio. We've also taken that approach from gaming. So especially when we think about through the lens of an occasion, we try to, what are those brands that actually fit in the occasion? So is it snacking? Well, gaming happens to be a great snacking occasion. So we've done a lot of partnerships, both like say with an Overwatch, with both Cheez-It and with Pringles. So it definitely runs the gamut based on what makes the most sense for that passion point.
All right, so then the next question is similar to that, because everyone's honing in on the fact about your portfolio and some of the legacy brands. So you have so many brands that are well recognized and have been around for many years. In thinking about not just media channels, not just new media, but brand partnerships, what's the strategy behind how you seek out partners?
How we seek out partners? Yeah, I think, one of the things we really try to do, especially through the lens of promotions, because those are very much even retail driven, is like, what are those partnerships that are going to make sense for, if you think about, I don't know, is it the consecutive circles, but we have for our brand, for our consumer, and for our retailer. We think very much about that, and that helps us understand what is the right partner. If we are thinking just truly on a brand by brand basis, who is that partner that's going to really help us bring to life, or who is actually targeting that, that target, that really strong strategic target that we want to go after. So there's a wide range of how we think about partnerships, also based on the outcome that we're trying to drive.
Got it.
So great question.
Yeah, we've had a lot of really good questions. So we may have time for maybe one or two more. If anyone has anything else, please type it in. In the meantime, I think this is a good kind of capstone question, because we've talked about what you guys have found over the last year and how that's kind of informing. So my question kind of is along the lines of what's next? And is there something that's kind of hanging out there that you haven't tried yet that you really want to try, or that you see as kind of the next frontier for you guys in terms of media and channels to execute on?
Yeah. Like I said, I know we're very much on the verge of getting into all things TikTok. So I know that is a big opportunity for us. I basically just launched from an internal model, this kind of an agile social approach. So really thinking through how can we be on, the pulse of culture, and really zeroing in on, from an organic perspective and putting out that new type of content, which puts us into a new space too of leveraging new content partners. So what are those kind of quick partners that we can work with for that content that can, we can get something out within 24 hours that resonates. And again, like we said, behavior changes quickly, right? So we want to make sure that we're addressing some new ways of working within social and within our partners. So I think that's a huge opportunity area for us moving into this year.
Got it. So I saved the hardest question for last.
Oh no.
Everything's starting to open back up. Hopefully everyone will start being able to travel over the course of the summer. What's the first place you're going to when you finally get out of town?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, if it opens up. Well, the thing is, I think we're being very proactive where we have a travel plan for August. We were just like, we'll see if it actually happens, but it's actually a makeup travel plan from last year where we're going to plan to do a family trip to Yosemite. So we will see if that will come to life. So how about you, Jason?
We have a plan this summer, similar out west. We're going to be in Colorado, hopefully. Hiking, rafting, biking, everything outdoors. So looking forward to getting back on a plane at some point soon.
Yeah, the plane, just so you could be outside again, right? It feels like that's what I'm looking forward to.
Exactly. Well, I think we're pretty much up with our time. There may be 1 or 2 minutes left if anyone has a question. Or Marty, if you have anything for us, any questions off the top of your head that you'd like us to close off with?
Well, thanks for having me.
Hey guys, as the afternoon sun comes in and shines the right side of my face. Well, thanks. And Sue, unfortunately, in Chicago today, we seem to have gone back to winter.
Yes.
Yesterday,
what happened?
Today, and it's going to be 65 tomorrow.
I know, and I saw 70s on Sunday.
I know.
So I'll deal with it. If it's a day, it's fine.
I know, exactly right. But listen, thanks so much, Sue and Jason. We really appreciated you joining, and for everyone's sticking around and joining us for the rest of the afternoon. It was a great day of speakers, and we're certainly excited for all of our upcoming days on this topic. But again, we just hope you all join Brand Innovators on Tuesday for Summit on Women in Marketing. We will be joined by marketing leaders from Harman International, Anheuser-Busch InBev, Babe Wine, Sam's Club, American Express, and She Spoke, and many more. So thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again soon.